future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant Reed, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to Nigel Farage, voted by you as the nation's best news presenter at the prestigious Trick Awards.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next few hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. Joining me to go head-to-head in a battle of minds, political commentator Matthew Stadlen, and also GB News presenter and former Brexit Party MEP Martin Daubney. They're going head-to-head. Between 4 and 6, Nigel Nelson and Danny Kelly will be joining me live in the studio to discuss. But before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon to you. It's 3:minutes. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. The French government will hold emergency talks this evening to address the civil unrest after a fifth night of riots. More than 700 people were arrested across the country overnight, with tear gas used to disperse crowds in Marseille. The violence follows the death of the teenager Nahel Merzouk, who was shot by police on Tuesday. In the capital, there was a huge police presence protecting the Champs-Élysées. The city's regional president, Valérie Pécresse, says security is being boosted and she's confident order will be restored.
What's happening is ultra-violence by small groups of people that are very well organized and very well trained, and they want to defy the Republic. And the Republic will not yield, and we will fight back.
Meanwhile, an attempted murder investigation's been opened after a mayor's home was ram-raided and set alight in a Parisian suburb. His wife and one of his children were hurt. The French journalist Antonin André says it's put more pressure on the president, Emmanuel Macron.
His family were were attacked in his house during the night, and his wife and his 2 children had to left the house in emergency because there was fire in the house. And this is what is a very shocking thing this morning. And every mayors in France wants that the state and Emmanuel Macron take more measures to stop the chaos.
2 people have been killed and 3 are in a critical condition after a mass shooting in the US state of Maryland. Police say up to 30 people suffered gunshot wounds during the attack, which took place in the city of Baltimore, where people had gathered for an event known as Brooklyn Day. Nothing is yet known about the attacker or a possible motive. New measures to deal with disruptive protests have come into force. They include expanded police powers to move on static or slow-walking protests like those used by Just Stop Oil. A criminal offence to tackle disruption in tunnels has also been introduced, carrying jail terms of up to 3 years. Critics argue the laws threaten the right to protest. Meanwhile, 5 Just Stop Oil activists have been charged after being arrested for disrupting London's Pride March yesterday. They've been charged with behaviour likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress. 2 others were released on bail, pending further inquiries. The government says it's determined to stop migrant boats coming to Britain, despite the recent legal setback. Ministers are preparing to appeal a court decision which blocked the deportation of asylum seekers to Rwanda. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says if nothing's done to stop the boats, the costs could spiral, reaching up to £11 billion.
I think your viewers want the government to take action. That is what we're doing. We're doing so in a way that clearly complies with the legal process. But it's important we now take this to the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister, the Home Secretary are determined to stop the boats. And if we don't, then there'll be a huge cost.
Barrister Lord Carlisle, though, says the proposal is unlawful.
Government is not upholding the law, and they've approached this whole bill in a completely legally non-compliant way. The basis of this bill is that there is a safe country or safe countries to send refugees to, but in fact they're only offering one safe country, and that's Rwanda. So the proposal is in tatters, it is unlawful, it is leading to people being kept in custody when they should not be kept in custody.
There are calls to introduce temporary work visas for people in the food industry to help reduce soaring prices. The former Environment Secretary George Eustace says the skills-based immigration policy should also be changed to focus on industries like agriculture that need more support. He spoke to Gloria Del Piero.
Those sectors who are producing food for the nation can't have access to the labour that they need. And that's driving both a labour shortage and wage inflation as well in those sectors, and that's exacerbating the problem. So it's not the cause of it, but it's a big contributing factor. And the one thing the government could do is to basically carve out and say, food is different. We are going to have a temporary visa scheme, maybe with a 2 or 3 year visa for anybody who wants to work in the food industry.
And you can see the full interview with the former Environment Secretary on Gloria Meets tonight from 6 p.m. Rail passengers are facing more disruption over the next week. ASLEF members at 16 train companies in England will refuse to work overtime, which operators rely on to run their full timetable. The union says it's calling for fair pay. The Rail Delivery Group says ASLEF rejected its last offer of a £5,000 raise, which would bring the basic salary for drivers working a 4-day week to nearly £65,000. Services will be affected from Monday to Saturday. This is GB News. More, as always, as it happens. But now it is back to Nana.
Good afternoon, welcome on board. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. And it's fast approaching 7 minutes after 3 o'clock. Now, before we go head-to-head over the next hour, joining me to do that today, political commentator Matthew Stadlen, and also GB News presenter and former Brexit Party MEP Martin Daubney. So coming up, a 5th night of chaos in France as rioting continues across the country. A burning car was used to attack the home of a Parisian suburban mayor in what authorities are treating as attempted murder. And would you want a pylon in your backyard? Because pylons could be forced on Brits in order to hit the government's net zero goals. As energy demands grow, ministers are concerned it could outpace the capacity of the national grid. Plus, new teachers in England could receive £2,400 from a Labour government to stop them leaving the profession. Now, the party says that their plan to recruit and retrain teachers in English schools would lead to world-class teaching for every child. Where have we heard that for? I've heard world-beating before. Now they're using world-class. It's doomed. Also, 7 Just Stop Oil protesters were arrested for displaying London's Pride Parade yesterday. LGBTQ+ Just Stop Oil members called on Pride to stop accepting sponsorship money from high-polluting industries. I wonder how they got to the protest. And according to one Oxford University professor, Britain's racial guilt is based on ignorance. Professor Nigel Biggar says that paying slavery reparations would rise up the agenda under a Labour government. All of that on the way in the next hour. As ever, tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. Right, so we are going head-to-head with the first story. France was faced with the fifth night of chaos as heavy clashes between police and rioters continued. Around 719 people were arrested last night, down from over 1,000 arrests the day before. President Emmanuel Macron has accused protesters of exploiting the death of 17-year-old Nahal, who was shot by police on Tuesday. Tensions are high across the country, with anti-immigration sentiment being at the forefront of the political agenda since 2022 presidential, since that election. And polls suggest that Macron's nationalist political opponent, Marine Le Pen, would win a runoff if held today. All right, so let's see what my panellists think of that. Also on the menu with regard to this topic is Rwanda and the Rwandan policy, which has been branded unlawful. Are riots just around the corner for us here in the UK? So to discuss, joining me, political commentator Matthew Stadler and also GB News presenter and former Brexit Party MEP Martin Daubney. I'm going to start with you, Matthew Stadler.
First of all, it's good to be here, Nana. I only just stopped sweating because I've been rushing over from Lords, where one of the great test matches of all time is unfurling. I'm here to be with you on GB News, so that's why I've got my MCC tie on.
Oh, that's good of you.
As far as the riots are concerned, it's first of all really difficult to understand when so many people are rioting exactly why they are, because there will be a whole range of reasons, I think. But I would suggest, and none of us are French, let alone French experts, but I would suggest that one of the reasons is because there is extreme poverty, just as there is in this country. Another reason is discrimination and racism, as there is in this country, but much more, I think, than there is in this country. Another reason, I was talking about this to Martin on his show yesterday, is because if you stick people in the suburbs, if you stick a whole bunch of not very well-off people, often immigrant communities, on the outskirts of cities, and you have all the posh, expensive stuff going on in the centres, then you are alienating people. You are quite literally othering them. We don't really do that in this country. Yes, we have inner cities. But where I live in West London, on my own street, you've got 50% of the houses are privately owned and 50% are divided up into social housing flats. And I think if you have integrated populations, it makes this sort of thing less likely. Having said that, we can't be complacent. I just mentioned cricket. We had a report into cricket in this country this week. Huge amounts of racism still there. Lots of progress still to be made. So we absolutely cannot be complacent.
Martin Daubney.
We need to end this nonsense that Britain is racist or France is racist. We're some of the most tolerant, welcoming countries on earth. Why are 606,000 net people per year getting here if we're so unwelcoming and terrible? On to France. There's a feeling of inevitability about what happened in France. 2,000 people arrested in 2 nights, 45,000 extra police force dispatched onto the streets, public buildings burning, widespread looting, feral youth just smashing in shops, taking trainers and handbags and even food. Now, they are opportunist scumbags. And this was precipitated by the shooting of a 17-year-old lad who Mbappe, the French football captain, called a saint. He wasn't a saint. Let's look, he had 15 convictions. He had 15 criminal activities. The car he was in, his friends said they borrowed. Now, they stole the car They were stopped by police because they were known to police. This kid resisted arrest the weekend before, so he was a known agent provocateur, and a tragedy unfolded. Nobody deserves to be shot like that. But what happened next? We had a French journalist on yesterday, you had him on again today, saying the left are taking political advantage because they want an insurrection. It's a wet dream for socialists for there to be a revolution and an uprising. The right don't need to do anything at the moment, actually, because the results of Macron's open borders policy is there for all to see. I agree with you.
They are. The right, as you acknowledged yesterday, the right are doing something. They are being opportunistic on this. And as far as the rioters themselves are concerned, they are also, some of them, opportunistic. I am not defending some of the absolutely disgusting behaviour we've seen in France. If it was happening on my street, I would be doing everything I could to stop it. In fact, in 2011, when we had our own riots, I was in France, ironically, and I came back early in order literally to defend, to use that word literally again, but yes, defend my house, defend my parents, defend my property. There is opportunism going on. There always is. There are people who just want to get a new pair of trainers, as you might say. There's looting and so forth. But the language still matters. And we saw two senior police unions yesterday use the word, I think, vermin to describe something. Now, I'm not saying it's much fun coming up against these people, but I wouldn't use words like vermin. I wouldn't use words like feral that you use, because that's not going to get to the root of the problem. We absolutely have to have a twin-track approach in France, and if it happens here as well. Law and order, yes, these people have to be held to account. We also have to deal with the poverty.
It has happened here, and I predict it will happen again. Every switched-on copper I speak to says, you know, this is coming our way. And part of the reason for that, Matthew, is that the police just aren't policing anymore. Young people don't fear the police. They're too busy dancing the Macarena or taking the knee to Black Lives Matter. And that sends out a message that they won't get their heads cracked with a truncheon. Like when I was a kid, if you put your foot through a shop window, you'd be banged up straight away. And now they're dancing around, and they're on social media filming their endeavours for likes and follows. They want this notoriety, and there's an absolute sense that if the police are on total eggshells, the wrong kind of arrest, the wrong kind of restraint. You see that? Remember, there's a video a couple of weeks ago from Vauxhall Station of 5 coppers completely unable to arrest a couple of black people because they're too scared to kneel on them or do it in a way because everything is being filmed and it will precipitate.
But I'm not going to comment on individual cases, but what I would say, I think this is really, really vital. Of course we have to have firm policing. The Conservatives, let us not forget, and I know you're not a fan of the Conservatives, but the Conservatives who've been in power for 13 years, one way or another, cut, and yes, they're trying to build them back, but 20,000 police officers. Round where I live, again in West London, you see drug drops in the middle of the day. You see people getting away with really bad stuff. We need firm policing. I agree with you on that.
That's true, but the point is that people are saying that this could be a mirror of what might be happening here if we don't get a hold on, in particular, at immigration policy.
But let's be careful, because we don't want to add petrol to the flames.
I'm not adding petrol to the flames. I'm giving you an honest observation that people are looking at that and saying that the lack of cohesion that we're seeing in France and the anger that we're seeing from people around could mean that potentially we are potentially...
And the petrol to the flames is being applied by the rioters. They've banned the sale of flammable fluids to people in France in jerry cans because they're literally throwing Molotov cocktails into libraries.
I do think there are differences,
burn books. And this lot are burning
we'll
books.
Get back
there
to
are
that.
differences between France and Britain.
Well, yeah, there are differences between France and Britain. It's divided by a channel that people are coming across in their droves. Right, well, moving on to the next story. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that, by the way. What do you think? Hundreds of miles. We'll move on now to this one. I mean, I don't fancy it in my backyard. Maybe you do. Do you fancy a pylon in your own backyard? Apparently, hundreds of miles of overhead cables and pylons could be forced onto the British public to meet the net zero goal. Yeah, of course. As energy demands grow, ministers are increasingly concerned it could outpace the capacity of the national grid as many households switch to electric cars and heat pumps. National Grid Chief Executive John Pettigrew told The Telegraph that it'd be incredibly challenging to expand the grid to meet the government's targets, including eliminating fossil fuel generation by 2035. But would you want a pylon in your backyard? Let's see what my panel make of that. Joining me now, Matthew Stadlin and also Martin Daubly. Martin.
Net zero, along with open borders, are two of the slow suicides that the liberal West is committing upon itself. This religion of saving the planet, of climate emergency, of net zero, basically is impoverishing people, it's impoverishing the poorest, the hardest. It's forcing petrol cars off the road by 2030. Gas boilers will be next. We're getting poorer, we're getting colder, we're getting hungrier, and we're told we should be happy. We're not happy about it. We don't need more pylons. We need more power stations. We need more shale. We need more coal. We need energy sovereignty. Now, the fact of the matter is, putting more wind farms, which don't work when there's no wind, as solar panels we found out last week, get overheated when it's too hot. You couldn't make it up. It's like Toy Town politics. There's a complete lack of joined-up thinking. But we don't need more pylons. We need to be energy sovereign.
Every time you talk about pylons, I'm thinking of a Twitter pylon.
Me too, yeah.
I've been on the wrong end of a lot of Twitter pylons. No one likes a pylon of any sort. Let me just address a couple of things of what you say, because I do think it is important. First of all, you link the two topics. You compared environmental science. You mistook science for religion there, Martin, but you compared what's going on with climate activism, and not just climate activism. One thing I will give the Conservative government some credit on, although not Rishi Sunak, who doesn't seem to be very interested in the environment at all. Hence the resignation, by the way, of Zach Goldsmith. Do you see his letter? It was absolutely toxic.
It was an essay.
Boris Johnson did something towards trying to save the planet. The Conservatives are taking this seriously. It's not just Stop Oil people. It is actually mainstream. Your views, I'm afraid, on this are fringe. On the open borders thing, just I have to make this point. You say open borders, and you use the word suicide. Yeah. No one wants, well, very, very few people, maybe the radical left, and I'm not a member, contrary to what some people might paint me as, a member of the radical left. No one wants open borders. I don't want open borders.
The EU do.
I don't.
The EU do. In the EU countries, they have open borders. You can go from one country to the next.
Yes, that's true. Within the EU.
Open borders. Those are open borders.
But what I mean is, when it comes to people coming across in irregular routes over the sea, incredibly dangerous, risking their life and limb. No one seriously wants. No one seriously wants that. So let's not paint people like me as a sort of loony left, because I'm not. On the climate science, we cannot wish it away. NIMBYism is a very strong force. Of course it is. I wouldn't want to have a pylon in my backyard. Right. We have to get it right. Policy has to be sensible and thought out and not knee-jerk. But if you say that we should renege on our commitment to reach net zero, I'm afraid that is fringe.
But you're saying that. OK, so if we don't do the pylons, this is the boss with the National Grid saying that we need to do that in order to kind of, keep up with the so-called 2030 and 2035 deadlines. What is the alternative, in your view?
Well, if the only way to reach our commitments is to stick more pylons on, then regrettably, I suppose I'd have to swing behind it. But life is not simple. It's not easy. The problem is we can't wish away the science. Wind farms, by the way, I love our natural world. The natural world is not just about carbon. It's not just about stopping temperatures going up. It's also about protecting beauty, right? I interviewed someone about rewilding on my 20 Questions with podcast the other day. When I go to Scotland, drive up to Scotland, or on the train, it is a beautiful landscape we have, and I'm afraid, yes, wind turbines do scar that landscape.
Martin?
The fact of the matter is, anybody with half a brain could have told us 10 years ago that if every car in Britain is electric, we're going to need more electricity. I mean, the fact we even have to say it is numbskulled. We don't need to go down this route. Now, when you look at the carbon footprint of producing electric batteries, electric cars, it's far greater than a traditional car. We can stick with what we have. Cars are cleaner burning now. They're more efficient than they've ever been. Encourage
where are you
that
basing
technology.
that on? Because you're essentially quoting facts at us. Where are you getting these facts, the idea that electric cars are more damaging to the environment than regular cars?
There is actually information that does tell you that the
what's the source? What's the source?
Let me just finish. There is information out there that you could look and Google and find.
But what's the source, Nana?
Let me just finish. Let me finish what I'm speaking. Is that there are plenty of sources that will tell you that, and in the break I'll find you an exact source for you. But there are plenty of sources that will tell you that the carbon footprint of creating an electric vehicle is far bigger than actually keeping your own car. And in fact, I'll give you one source, and that was Rowan Atkinson himself, who was an electrical engineer, who had said that himself. So that is a source.
Rowan Atkinson?
Rowan Atkinson.
As in Mr. Bean?
As in Mr. Bean.
That's an unusual source.
Well, you asked for a source. No, it's not an unusual source, because he's an electrical engineer.
Well, let's do some typing
in the break. No, I'm not going to do some typing in the break. Don't patronise me. Because
you said you were.
Let me finish. I don't need to, because I've just remembered a source.
Let's not have another row. I'm not up for a personal row.
Thank you very much. Well, OK, so let me talk about this. The source, for me, is Rowan Atkinson. He's an electrical engineer. He wrote about it, actually, in the paper, saying that he has gone off the electric car dream because he realises that, actually, it is not better for the environment, and that you're better off keeping your petrol engine until it actually dies out rather than buying a new electric car. But, right, There we go. Right, let's move on. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. On the way, new teachers could be offered £2,400 bonus under the Labour Party to stop the classroom dropouts. But is this the right way to stop the exodus? That's up next.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, you're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, earlier we were discussing the chaos in France. Let's have a look at what you've been saying. Nick says, in all the days this trouble has been happening, I'm surprised that the word anarchy has not been used. These riots have gone well beyond protest. Ian says the French government needs to get a grip of these riots, on these idiots. Dee says, my friend is currently visiting her sister an hour or so outside Paris. Looting and rioting is going on everywhere. Oh dear, crikey. And Chris says, well, I just hope the historic libraries are removing books for safe storage and museums are moving stuff to storage. But unfortunately, you can't rebuild listed buildings and rebuild heritage. Yeah, good point. This is a real problem. Let's hope that they can stop that violence quite soon. But if you've just tuned in, it's just coming up to 26 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. Moving on to our next story now. A Labour government would give £2,400 to teachers at the beginning of their careers to try to stop them leaving the classroom. Now, the party's vision for education is announced by Labour Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson today. According to government figures, nearly 1 in 5 teachers who qualified in 2020 have since quit. Now, this pay boost could cost $50 million a year, would be funded by removing tax breaks for private schools. Is this the right idea? So joining me to discuss, going head-to-head, political commentator Matthew Stadlen, also GB News presenter and former Brexit Party MEP Martin Daubney. Martin Daubney.
I think it's a a vote-winning idea. It would go down well with the Labour bloc. I agree teachers aren't paid enough. I come from a family of teachers. But I'm very against the idea of taxing private schools. And the reason for that, I didn't go to private school. I went to a bucket comp. I did all right for myself. But what I think they miss the point on here is that a great many families use their life savings and they scrap everything they've got to get their children into private schools. This myth that everyone is some sort of Boris Johnson type Etonian, a toff, who can afford this is wrong. A great many hard-working, ordinary families strive to get their children into the best school they can to give them the best start in life. So I don't like the idea of taxing the so-called rich to help the poor. It's typical steal from John, give to Peter and Paul, that sort of idea. And I think it's the politics of envy. And that's what I think puts a lot of people off with the Labour Party. And I say that as somebody who voted for the Labour Party for 20 years. I think now all they want to do is tax the rich, and what will happen is they'll just flee the country.
Matthew Studley.
Just on that last point, that's a very old-fashioned conservative argument, the idea that if you raise taxes, people will just flee the country. As you said, we have a great country, right? Yeah, we've got problems, there's progress to be made across lots of different areas, including the environment, but we are a very good country, and I don't think people want to leave it. If I was super rich, I wouldn't want to leave this country. Now, on the particular issue of Labour's policy, I actually think it's a little bit gimmicky. I mean, every penny counts at the moment because people are really struggling. And I keep saying this, 11 million people are struggling to afford to pay their bills. So 2,000 odd quid is going to help some people. Whether it's enough to turn around the education system, whether it's really enough to encourage teachers to stay. I mean, the dropout, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way against teachers, but the dropout rate for teachers during this Conservative government of the last however many years, 13 years, is shocking. And schools are the lifeblood of our society.
Yeah, I totally agree that the burnout rate... I've got a lot of mates who are teachers. I play football with a lot of teachers, and they're all exhausted. They're all on their knees. They are underpaid and undervalued. I'd say the same applies for nurses. We can agree that these people should be paid more. But what I don't like is this idea that we should penalise private school attendance. What will simply happen is that the rich won't care and we'll get more students from overseas. I used to do a lot of school talks in private schools, and I know that they could fill those schools alone with Chinese students, with students from overseas. It won't bother the schools. They'll simply up their fees, and wealthier kids and parents will come in. But what will be priced out are the aspirational, hard-working, middle-class families who will then not be able to get the best for their children. And we do live in a free market economy, and those kids being forced back into comps when they have a choice. If you want to try and get in a grammar school now, you've got to buy a house. It costs a fortune. So we already have stratas in education. But I think this gimmick of paying £2.5 more to a teacher, it's not going to solve the problem.
I just think on the private school thing, I think it's really interesting because we've been debating this, haven't we, since, I don't know, decades, since the Thatcher years. And when perhaps Labour were a bit more serious about even thinking about potentially abolishing private schools. I say this just cards on the table as someone who's privately educated myself. And having this conversation with my wife at the moment, what would we want our child to do? Personally, I would love him to go to the local state school, which, by the way, is outstanding on Ofsted's recommendation. But I think there is the chance of unintended consequences that you allude to. There is the possibility that the really rich people will still pay the fees. The people who can only just manage to pay the fees will drop out and go into the state sector. And then people from overseas will hoover up those places. That is a possibility. In principle, though, it's a clash, isn't it? Between, on the one hand, parents, market economy, parents having the freedom to send their children wherever they want to send them. On the other hand, the rights of the child not to face discrimination in a way, educational discrimination, while they are children. So simply because someone's parents can't afford them to send to a better school, they might end up being disadvantaged. That is the clash. Isn't
the point that instead of giving somebody a little bribe to sort of make them stay, the Labour Party should really, if that's going to be one of their policies, actually be focusing on actually raising the standard of all education, especially in state schools, and spending more money in there than trying to bribe teachers to stay in, surely? Because that's only dumbing everything down, because all that will happen... I went to a private school. Most of the people that were there were some very, very rich people, but most of the people there were quite average, and their parents parents working very, very hard to send their kids there. My parents were in that category.
Yeah, and I think we need to be very, very careful. We've already been paralysed by strikes under a Conservative rule. You know, rail, teachers, nurses, junior doctors. What's it going to be like if the Labour Party start kind of taking their knee to their union donors? The NEU are the most militant. They're the ones who are asking for vaccine mandates in classrooms, for mask mandates in classrooms. They hold a tremendous amount of power. And if one-off pay rises for teachers on the cards, how soon before they want an inflation-busting pay rise? What about the nursing unions? And I think we're going to be heading for a huge, huge public purse. If we're dangling these carrots before an election, what the hell is it going to be like afterwards?
First of all, just to your point, Nana, you can't drive standards up without teachers. So we have to find a way, whether it's a Conservative government or a Labour government or a coalition, we have to find a way of keeping teachers in the profession. It's just so... It's so important. If we don't have teachers, how can educational standards rise? The other problem is we are trapped at the moment as a society. If we raise people's wages, then the idea economically is that that's inflationary, and then everything gets worse.
We've seen what's happened. It's like a spiral. It's a vicious cycle. I really think they're going in the wrong direction. I think it's actually the Labour Party should look at actually improving education standards when they get in office, if they get in office, rather than trying to think that they're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. It just simply won't work. But what are your thoughts? I'd love to hear those at gbnews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. And earlier in the show, we were discussing pylons that could be forced on us, the British public, to reach this ridiculous net zero target. Let's see what you've been saying. Mikey says net zero is an expensive scam. I'm with you there, Mikey, all the way. Graham says net zero is for the poor. Net zero is zero for the poor. It's just zero in your bank account, frankly, by the end of it. Mary says, would I want a pylon in my backyard? I would just like a backyard. Would rather a pylon than some of my antisocial neighbours. Well, you know, it'll be electrifying if you do get one. I think they're terrible, they're dangerous, and I think there are problems with them in themselves, especially environmental factors, which I think they should actually put into the equation as well. But if you just join me, welcome on board. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. On the way, 7 arrests were made yesterday as Just Stop Oil protests delayed London's Pride Parade. So have Just Stop Oil lost the plot? But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
It's 3:33. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The French government will hold crisis talks this evening to address the civil unrest after a fifth night of rioting. More than 700 people were arrested across the country overnight, with tear gas used to disperse crowds in Marseille. In Paris, an attempted murder investigation is being opened after a mayor's home was ram-raided and set alight. His wife and one of his children were hurt. 2 people have been killed and 3 people are in critical condition after a mass shooting in the US state of Maryland. Police say up to 30 people were injured in the city of Baltimore, where people had gathered for an event called Brooklyn Day. Nothing is yet known about the attacker or a possible motive. 5 Just Stop Oil activists have been charged with behaviour likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress after being arrested for disrupting London's Pride March yesterday. Police say 2 other men have been released on bail, pending further inquiries. The NHS has seen a steep rise in its demand for gambling addiction services. Health officials are particularly concerned about a touch of a button bets, with children and adults being bombarded with gambling ads. New specialist clinics are being opened across the country after nearly 1,400 patients were referred last year. And some breaking news just into us in the last few minutes. It's been confirmed the US President will meet the King and Prime Minister when he visits the UK next week. The White House says Joe Biden's travelling to London to strengthen the close relationship before heading to Lithuania and Finland to attend the NATO summit. More on that and all the rest of our stories on our website, gbnews.com. And that's it for the moment. Now back to Nana.
Thank you, Aaron. It's coming up to 36 minutes after 3 o'clock. Still to come, an Oxford professor has said that Britain's racial guilt is based on ignorance. Nigel Biggar says that Britain paying slavery reparations would rise up the agenda under a Labour government. But before that, 7 arrests were made yesterday as Just Stop Oil protests delayed London's Pride Parade. So have Just Stop Oil lost the plot? Stay tuned. That's up next.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. If you just tuned in, where have you been? We're going head to head. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. Don't forget as well, you can download the GB News app and check out all the programmes that we have on the channel. Now, just before we were talking about more pylons being installed to reach net zero goals, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on this. Daryl says, what would be the point of mass pylon building and installation or miles of overhead cabling when we won't be able to produce enough energy for them to deliver? Also, wouldn't it make our infrastructure more vulnerable to high wind damage and vandalism? Of course it would. And also it's probably damaging to the animals and also your backyard, your family, your home. Nobody wants them, but they want to reach net zero. It's absurd. Right, Les said, he didn't write that, I just added that in. Les says net zero will be the downfall of all of us. Yes, it will be, alongside those pylons. Stan says, but if we meet our net zero target, will the world be saved in 2030? Oh, no, it won't. No, it won't, because apparently we contribute 1%, although that is slightly disingenuous because we offset it because we have things produced all across the world in places like China who aren't doing anything to reduce their net zero target at all. Right. Let's move on to 7 Just Stop Oil protesters because they've been arrested for trying to halt the annual Pride Parade in central London yesterday. Now, before the parade started, LGBTQ+, it's getting ridiculous now, it's the alphabet soup. What's next? Just Stop Oil members called on Pride to stop accepting sponsorship money from high-polluting industries, including Coca-Cola. There's so many of them. Police said that the parade was briefly delayed for around 17 minutes whilst officers dealt with the protesters sitting in front of the soft drink company's float. Now, organisers estimate more than 30,000 participants from across 600 organisations took part in the parade. So, what do you think? Let's welcome again to my panel, political commentator Matthew Stadlin, also GB News presenter and former Brexit Party MEP Martin Daubeny. The question is, have Just Stop Oil lost the plot? Matthew, I'll start with you. Have they?
Oh, the great irony, and I think we all know this, don't we? The great irony about what Just Stop Oil are doing and their kind of tussle with the right-wing media is that we're still talking about them. And in a way, that's almost it, isn't it? Yes, of course, we need the general population to be on side to move forward, to make positive strides for the environment. And by the way, what you just said about China is the same old stuff.
So, what's the point? What's wrong with that? It's true.
China needs to do far more than it's doing. But we can't look at China and encourage them on a governmental level to do more than they're doing.
I
don't take the lead.
I'm not going to encourage them. I don't think we should.
We are taking the lead. Just Stop Oil get headline after headline after headline. I was doing the papers yesterday morning on another station. The front page of The Sun, for goodness sake. The Sun and GB News love to hate Just Stop Oil because they know it's going to get eyeballs. And guess what? You're doing Just Stop Oil's job for them.
It's not doing them any favours whatsoever. In fact, it's building a load of people who are absolutely looking at them and thinking that they're fools. But the bottom line is, we all agree, most of us, in the cause of having a good environment, but this simply isn't the way to do it.
Just Stop Oil are narcissistic cultists. And yesterday was a superb example of how they think their grievance is bigger than the grievance of persecution of homosexuality, trans people. It's like, no, we're more important than you. It wasn't interesting. The police, they must have been in a real corner. Oh, God, whose side do we take?
Yeah, exactly.
Because normally we take cups of tea to Just Stop Oil and we pat them on the head. And we wear rainbow salopettes and dance the Macarena in the YMCA at Pride. So whose side are we on?
Which minority?
And that, I think, is a key point, because the police is politicised now. I'm digressing slightly, but they've taken sides in these tussles. As a consequence, they're impotent. But the notion that stopping a float full of guys in hot pants is going to save the planet is literally the absurdity of Just Stop Oil in a nutshell. And now you say we're talking about them, and we are. But every time we talk about them, public sympathy for them gets smaller and smaller and smaller. They're imbeciles. They're entitled wannabes. They don't understand the real world. they don't pay their own gas bills. They're students who live with their parents.
Shall we have a little bit of balance here? Let's have the other side.
No. It was his turn. No, it was his turn. It was his turn. So he was talking. There's plenty of balance. Surely you're going to provide it, because do you support Just Stop Oil in the way they're protesting?
So I don't actually think, I'm afraid, that what they're doing can be justified, right? And I say that because if I did think that, I'd probably have to go out and do it myself. Or I'd be tempted to go out and do it myself. And would I do it myself? No, I wouldn't. And the reason I wouldn't is...
Because you love cricket. They did it on a cricket
Don't
match the other
mention cricket
day.
anymore. I've taken my tie off, Nana.
He's taking his tie off because they're losing.
The reason that I wouldn't do it is because I would not want to be responsible, personally, for an ambulance not being able to get to a hospital. I wouldn't want to be responsible for someone not being able to get to their father's funeral, right? That doesn't mean to say that these people aren't brave. I mean, you can call them a cult if you want. These people are risking their freedom in order to make a lot of noise about something that, A, they care about, and B, why are you giggling?
Because they're attention-seeking fools.
Martin and I are a bit attention-seeking, but we're not prepared to go to prison for our attention-seeking. What I'm saying is the environment does matter. These people are brave, but I think they're misguided in the way they go about it. But this is, I think, very important. When I was a presenter, I won't mention the rival channel, for 4 years taking phone calls from members of the public right across the country and beyond, 11,000 calls I took. How did I make the environment a topic that people wanted to talk about? Well, it was when Extinction Rebellion were doing their stuff, and that's because it excites really strong feelings in people. There is no doubt that Just Stop Oil are forcing the environment, which I don't just believe, but following the science, think is absolutely vital to us to talk about. They are forcing it onto the agenda.
But it's already on the agenda.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, every political party in the United Kingdom, believes in the Green mantra. The Green Party has been made redundant because all of them are Greta Thunberg in different coloured rosettes. Look at the net zero targets of the Conservative Party who are in power. Get rid of petrol cars by 2030, gas boilers by 2050, no more coal-fired power stations, no more shale. It's like they've already won. And the point is, there isn't an alternative.
Just to come back on one thing, and that is this. I've had a relatively privileged life. I've had a lot of good fortune, right? As I said earlier, I was privately educated, so I'm not pretending I'm on my uppers, right? we have to deal with these environmental challenges. While we can't wish them away, we have to deal with them in a way that means that the poorest in our society do not suffer.
Yeah, but that isn't happening, because the
and
poorest are suffering.
if you're going to have levies, green levies, on all of our energy bills, that's not fair, because it's not progressive.
But we've already got that.
It has to. I'm saying it has to be done through general taxation. And by the way, I accept that the battery stuff, the electric car stuff, isn't as obviously clear-cut as perhaps I thought it was. I did a bit of typing away. You thought I was patronising. No, I wasn't. I would say I would do some typing away. I did some typing away. But there is an important article, you'll laugh, no doubt, but in The Guardian, which attempts to debunk exactly that Rowan Atkinson argument.
But the fact of the matter is about net zero, it's an entitled, privileged belief system because the rich can afford to pay for it. When you're existing, when you're putting a huge proportion of your salary, your livelihood into surviving, heating, eating, right, and just not being dead, right, that takes up a lot more of your money if you're not well off. And we're seeing all the utility bills go up. That won't change under green, all the so-called green jobs. Where are they? Net zero will make people net poorer.
I agree. Well, look, it seems to be, and also think about it, the people who will have the pylons in their backyard won't be those wonderful people with all the money who've got lovely land and things.
We don't know that. And
no,
you can't wish
it will
climate
be.
crisis away. You can't wish reality away because it's tough.
Well, that's your reality.
That's your
reality.
We have to make
you
them well.
might believe it. You might believe it. I believe the planet will change and the climate will change anyway. And if we look at it, our contribution is about 1%.
That's not true, Nana.
No, well, I know it's slightly disingenuous because we use things in other countries and obviously they are making things on our behalf, but then they need to do something about it as well if they're that bothered. But they're not.
We all do, yeah.
But they're not bothered about it.
We could all live in caves in Britain and China wouldn't care.
They won't care. It's just going to carry on. So this is what they're doing. Very basically, the government has stolen Just Stop Oil's thunder, so they've got to do more and more ridiculous things to get some sort of attention. It's very sad. But let's move on to the next story. An Oxford professor has said that Britain's racial guilt is based on ignorance. Outrageous Professor of Moral and Pastoral Theology of Oxford, Nigel Biggar, said that the British people... It's exciting, wasn't it? Well, am I that boring? No, listen, the British people only feel guilt about the country's colonial past because they know nothing about it. Now, the defiant Oxford professor also says that Britain paying slavery reparations would rise up the agenda under a Labour government. Now, this follows President Biden's calling out the Supreme Court ruling against affirmative action. He said the court has effectively ended affirmative action in college admissions, and I strongly, strongly disagree with the court's decision. So what does my panel make of this? I'm going to start with you, Martin Daubney.
I think the poisonous lie that Britain is one of the most racist countries on earth is damaging.
Who says that, though?
From cradle to grave. And children are taught in schools now that white people are oppressors and black people are oppressed. My children tell me this all the time. They're going for the state education system. The curriculum is basically saying Britain is racist and white people are the problem. And that's because we look through the lens of history. This week we saw St Paul's Cathedral. Yeah, the one Hitler tried to flatten, calling Winston Churchill a white supremacist and an imperialist. The guy that beat Hitler, the guy that stopped us living under fascism, that they are slagging off because they only see the bad things of our greatest Britons and the bad things of our history. Britain stepped up and helped to end slavery. We were formative, we were key players in ending slavery. You can laugh all you like.
You're laughing. Why
Look
are you
at the Royal Navy
laughing?
who got involved in this battle. And the fact of the matter is, we are teaching children a poisonous lie. He's right, because we only teach the bad bits. And the fact of the matter is, Britain is one of the most welcoming, tolerant nations on earth.
Matthew Stadler.
To start with your last bit, I think Britain is one of the most welcoming and inclusive countries in the world. In fact, I would go to be so bold as to say of the sort of major economies in the world, it's probably the leading country when it comes to inclusivity, despite the attempts of some of the fringe players we have on the airwaves. So I'd agree with you on that. Secondly, the fight against Nazism, the fight against fascism, was something that we should all be deeply proud of and we should never forget, right? And I'd like to bring this point up because it illustrates the sort of richness, I think, of the diversity in our country and different perspectives. My dad's dad and mum escaped the Nazis. They were Jews. If Britain hadn't let them in, they might have died. Simple as that. I mean, I wouldn't be here.
And you wouldn't be here.
Great relief.
Oh, dear.
But my grandfather on my mum's side, so my mum's dad, who was by way a teacher, a high master, he worked his way up from private to become one of Montgomery's, Field Marshal Montgomery's, one of the great generals of the Second World War. One of his aides-de-camp, he was a major, he won the Military Cross. He's literally pictured with Monty in the car as they were liberating
what's
Paris.
The point?
I am deeply proud of what this country achieved in defeating fascism and Nazism. The complexity arises in that two things can be true at the same time. We should look at history trying to get to the truth and the facts. It's hard enough trying to analyse
OK, so what about... Let's just quickly come to this question.
I'm coming to the question.
My
point is that Churchill, if we take him, because it's an interesting and obvious example, was to some extent, if you can be to some extent, a white supremacist, talking about the takeover of Australia and America. Let me finish the point, because I'm rebutting
quickly,
what you've
because
said.
it's going on for a long time.
What he said was that the Aborigines and the Native Americans had been displaced by a higher grade race.
OK.
If that's not white supremacism, what is?
If we're going to judge every historical figure on the worst bits they did, Nelson Mandela was one of the world's top 10 terrorists by the FBI.
No, different.
Right, but we don't look at that bit. Should we take the statue of Mandela down? Of course we shouldn't.
No, we look at history in the round. We try to get to the truth.
Hang on,
let him finish, please.
What I'm saying is, especially with the British, we have this self-flagellatory self-hatred, and it comes from academia, it comes from the mainstream media, it comes from our political class, it comes from every classroom in Britain, saying that we are a toxic force because of things like slavery. And you're right. Reparations would be the most ridiculous act of self-harm this country, philosophically, economically, could ever do.
But I don't hate myself, and I am proud.
Nobody said you did.
No, but you were talking about self-hatred. I don't hate myself. I don't hate my country. I'm incredibly proud of my country in many ways. But what I'm not going to be is blind to the bad stuff we did. Yes, we helped abolish slavery. We were massive slave dealers as well. Yes, we defeated Nazism, but we were a massive colonial power as well. 2 or 3 or 4 or many things can be true at the same time.
That's true.
What he was saying.
Well, that is true, but we are hanging on the language of the day that we used, and we're bringing it into current day, and we're judging it based on that. So I think there's an issue with that. With regard to the reparations, and also with regard to the teaching of history, because what the point is that British people aren't really taught the history properly, which is why people don't really understand. I believe they're not taught the history properly, and in my own experience, so when I was at school, people were saying, oh, well, basically I must have been a slave, so people assume because I'm black I must be a slave. Everyone thinks that I must have come from the Windrush, or that I got on a boat or something to get here, as in, you know, I got on a dinghy or some form of other illegal transport. They don't understand that actually the slave trade was perpetrated by many black slave owners as well. The way it's said in history is as though white people came in and took over Africa. It wasn't like that. It was a trade, it was a business, and at that time it was legal.
And it was evil.
Okay, nobody's saying...
It was evil,
let me finish.
wasn't it?
Nobody's saying that it was good, but the point of the matter is, if we take it into that context at that time, it was legal, we've accepted it's bad. So then to look on it and say we're going to pay reparations now because we did something bad years ago where none of those people are still alive and it wasn't perpetrated by any of the people who live now, I think is a ludicrous thing.
Can I just answer that? I think, first of all, reparations is a really difficult and complicated thing, and I'm certainly not straightforwardly in favour of reparations. Where does it start? Where does it end? Just on your point, it's an important one, on saying we shouldn't judge the past by the standards of the today. Nazism, for example, was evil then, it's evil now. Slavery was evil then, it's evil now.
Nobody's saying that. They were talking about the language and the language and the way it was then. The way it was then, these things were legal. We've accepted that they're bad. We've gone backwards and said, no, we shouldn't be doing that. We'll never do that again. Although slavery is the biggest profession probably right now. Yeah, and in this country, there's more slavery going on from white people to white people and all over the world. In fact, your phone, your laptop, and all the things, these wonderful electric cars, are probably made by people who are enslaved in some way. So we're total hypocrites. Why are we going backwards when we should be looking forwards at what we're currently doing now?
There are more...
No, we haven't learned.
There are more slaves kept by black people today, and that's the point. No one cares about that. The so-called anti-slave, the anti-racists don't care about that. They would rather look to the past to cause grievances today.
This is what you're both making good points on this, if I may say so.
You're both reparations today.
You're both making good points in that. Of course, we should be absolutely against any form of slavery that's going on today, and we
they're not.
Hang on, but look, I'm saying we should be. We should have a laser-like focus of what's going on in Congo, on how our phones are made. Absolutely, we should. It doesn't mean that we can't, at the same time, look at history, try to learn from history. Part of getting better in the present is learning from the past.
You would say that, and that's so true, but sadly we are all using phones, laptops, wearing clothes that are probably made by slaves. So instead of looking backwards, I think we should look at what we're currently doing. Instead of looking that we should be paying that for that, Who is going to pay for the things that who is going to pay the people who we've enslaved now? I don't know. It's not going to work out. So we need to start looking forward at what we're currently doing. But let's see what you've been saying, because we've been talking about lots of things throughout the show. Oh, I had some emails to read, but they've all appeared to have gone. Oh, well, never mind. Nobody told me. Thank you for telling me afterwards. Well, listen, thank you so much to my wonderful panel. Matthew Stadlen, thank you very much. Matthew will be back for the next debate, and also Martin Dormley, good to see you as well. Martin will be back for the next debate as well. And also, please stay tuned, because we've got loads more to come. I have a fantastic, amazing guest coming in at 5 o'clock. She'll be live. Wimbledon is coming up, so that's a clue. She was a superstar tennis. She won Wimbledon in 1977. Who is she? We'll be talking to her at 5. Stay tuned.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 4. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The French government will hold crisis talks this evening to address the civil unrest after a fifth night of riots. More than 700 people were arrested across the country overnight, with tear gas used to disperse crowds in Marseille. The violence follows the death of teenager Nahel Mazouk, who was shot by police on Tuesday. In the capital, there was a huge police presence protecting the Champs-Élysées. The city's regional president, Valérie Pécresse, says security is being boosted and she's confident order will be restored.
What's happening is ultra-violence by small groups of people that are very well organized and very well trained, and they want to defy the Republic. And the Republic will not yield, and we will fight back.
Meanwhile, an attempted murder investigation has been opened after a mayor's home was ram-raided and set alight in a Parisian suburb. His wife and one of his children were hurt. French journalist Antonin André says it's put more pressure on President Emmanuel Macron.
His family were attacked in his house during the night, and his wife and his two children had to left the house in emergency because there was fire in the house. And this is what is a very shocking thing this morning. And every mayors in France wants that the state and Emmanuel Macron take more measures to stop the chaos.
Well, some British tourists in the capital say that despite the unrest, they do still feel safe.
We checked out the news, we think it's absolutely fine. There's so many things going on in the world. If you listen to everything, you'd never travel.
We've been to Paris before. It's got the same feel about it. You can see that it's still a lovely city, and we haven't come across any problems.
2 people have been killed and 3 are in a critical condition after a mass shooting in the US state of Maryland. Police say up to 30 people suffered gunshot wounds during the attack, which took place in the city of Baltimore, where people had gathered for an event called Brooklyn Day. Nothing's yet known about the attacker or a possible motive. The US President will meet King Charles and the Prime Minister when he visits the UK next week. Buckingham Palace has confirmed Joe Biden will visit Windsor Castle on the 10th of July. The White House says he's travelling to London to strengthen the close relationship between the nations. He'll then head to Lithuania for the NATO summit before heading on to Finland. Back here, new measures to deal with disruptive demonstrations have come into force. They include expanded police powers to move on static or slow-walking protests like those used by Just Stop Oil. A criminal offence to tackle disruption in tunnels has also been introduced, carrying jail terms of up to 3 years. Critics say the laws threaten the right to protest. Meanwhile, 5 Just Stop Oil activists have been charged with behaviour likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress. They were arrested for disrupting London's Pride March yesterday. 2 others were released on bail pending further inquiries. The government says it's determined to stop migrant boats coming to Britain despite the legal setback. Ministers are preparing to appeal a court decision which blocked the deportation of asylum seekers to Rwanda. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says if nothing's done to stop the boats, the costs could spiral, reaching up to £11 billion.
I think your viewers want the government to take action. That is what we're doing. We're doing so in a way that clearly complies with the legal process. But it's important we now take this to the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister, the Home Secretary are determined to stop the boats. And if we don't, then there'll be a huge cost.
Well, Barrister Lord Carlisle says the proposal is unlawful.
Government is not upholding the law, and they've approached this whole bill in a completely legally non-compliant way. The basis of this bill is that there is a safe country or safe countries to send refugees to, but in fact they're only offering one safe country, and that's Rwanda. So the proposal is in tatters, it is unlawful, it is leading to people being kept in custody when they should not be kept in custody.
And rail passengers are facing yet more disruption over the next week. ASLEF members at 16 train companies in England will refuse to work overtime, which operators rely on to run their full timetable. The union says it's calling for fair pay, but the rail delivery group says ASLEF rejected its last offer of a £5,000 raise, which would bring the basic salary for drivers working a 4-day week to nearly £65,000. Services will be affected from Monday through to Saturday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Nana.
Good afternoon, welcome on board. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio, and it's fast approaching 8 minutes after 4 o'clock. Britain is brewing the perfect storm. Now, the French system is broken. Gone is the vision of France as the utopia of people riding bicycles and the caricature of garlic and berets, with the Eiffel Tower in the background and that deeply French musical sound characterised by the melody of the accordion, the things that gave France its unique identity. Some would maybe call this a stereotype. Alongside that, the French were also very famed for their ability to protest. But what we've seen and been witnessing on its streets over the last few days is another level. And it transcends the killing of Nihal, the young 17-year-old of Algerian descent, shot at point-blank range. Now, whilst this appears to have been the catalyst, it has exposed a deeply held anger within France itself. It would seem the social cohesion that many took for granted has evaporated. Some say uncontrolled immigration is to blame, alongside the behaviour of the police towards those of immigrant backgrounds. Others say a load of people have jumped on the bandwagon and seized on this opportunity to bag a free TV and loot a load of stores. France is broken. And as much as people want to deny a migration element, I beg to differ. I believe that it is actually at the core. In my view, people riot because of a perceived injustice, usually involving a minority, and the injustice is often only the tip of the iceberg. Cast your mind back to the shooting of Mark Duggan in August in 2011, the Tottenham riots. At the heart of it was a perceived injustice. Wood Green shopping city was ransacked, riots sprang up in Wolverhampton, Birmingham, Clapham. All over the country, people were rioting. Remember the Black Lives Matter movement? Whilst they turned out to be a bunch of fraudsters exploiting white guilt, the riots that ensued in America were based on what was seen as an injustice. That injustice is all the more likely to spill out into a riot when people believe that they don't have a stake in society. You don't risk it all by rioting if you have a lot to lose. Nahar was buried yesterday, and whilst the funeral passed peacefully, there was anger at what many call endemic police racism. Protesters say his killing was typical of the heavy-handed approach the police used towards those living in France's deprived black and North African communities. And the anger shows no sign of abating. Last night, French police were ambushed by rioters and special forces were sent to Lyon. And so far, hundreds of officers have been injured and over 700 businesses ransacked or burnt down, with more than 1,000 arrests. It's a worrying sign, and we cannot sit and watch complacently. Britain is brewing the perfect storm. We need to get a handle on our own immigration situation. We cannot continue to house people indefinitely for years whilst we process their claims. It's unacceptable. We absolutely need to stop the votes because the social cohesion in this country is at stake. When people feel disenfranchised, anger builds. Who would blame British people for getting angry if they feel their needs are not a priority? And who would blame a genuine asylum seeker getting angry when their claim is taking years to process? And who would blame the taxpayers of this country, seeing their money being squandered on pointless schemes to quell the situation? Those involved in rioting are usually those who feel disenfranchised by society. The world needs to work together to solve this problem, And what we're seeing in France is only the tip of a global iceberg. Before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. At the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, would you be happy with a pylon in your backyard? I don't think so. Not a pylon, not the social media kind. The government is planning to fast-track planning applications for overhead cables and pylons so Britain can reach net zero by 2050. But can you imagine one of these monstrosities in your backyard? They're eyesores. And then at 4:50, it's Worldview. I'll be joined by Russian journalist Alexei Ovir, live from Red Square, to give us the latest update on Russia, including reports that the Kremlin have cancelled a major event over security concerns following last week's so-called mutiny. And then it's time for this week's Outside. Now, this week's mystery guest is a tennis icon whose career has spanned 26 years. She's also won 3 major Grand Slams. Can you guess who she might be? That's coming up in the next hour. Tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. So welcome again to my panel, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. He's ready now. And also GB News senior commentator Nigel Nelson. Welcome to you both. Nice to see you. Right. Well, where should we go with this one then? I'm going to start with you, Nigel. Then your views.
OK.
Well, we've been seeing the riots. We've been watching it. What is your thoughts on this? So, do we have something to worry about?
Yes, actually, we do. And I agree with every word of your analysis there. I thought it was really good, that.
Thank you.
There are several things in France that are worse than Britain. So, for a start, migration is a much bigger problem in France than it is here. So, you're talking about 7 million migrants, 1 in 10 of the population. So that starts the problem. The racism in the police, they've not addressed in a way that we've been trying to address it here. Problem number 2. And obviously, their kind of stop-and-shoot policy, they had a record number of 13 deaths under it last year. That's got to be addressed, obviously, over there. We don't have that. You mentioned Mark Duggan. Well, of course, that was 12 years ago.
Yeah.
But that's the last time we've had that kind of a similar situation taking place in this country. So, yes, I think we've got a lot of lessons to learn there. Be thankful Britain is slightly better than France in that respect. But there is a danger things like that could spill over here.
Danny?
I'm not convinced, or I haven't been persuaded entirely that the French police are endemically racist. A French copper would probably say the reason that they have to patrol those areas is because it's riddled with crime. Now, you could argue that, are they being racist with that approach? Well, the coppers would say, well, look, we've got to be there because that's where all the crime is, generally speaking. Now, this lad was no saint. Driving in, I was listening to Martin. I wasn't aware that this kid had a rap sheet as long as your arm. Doesn't justify anything.
Yeah.
But what that did what that made me think was how the police were aggressive towards him. Forget the gun, that's inexcusable. Forget the shooting. I'm just talking about the police officer's approach. Again, he shouldn't have been shot. But maybe if you have someone with a rap sheet as long as your arm and he's known to the police, that's maybe why the police are on the back foot. And again, please don't for 1 second believe that I'm trying to excuse what actually happened. So there's nothing that I can see that proves that the French police are racist. Is it going to...
Really, not the fact that they shot him at point-blank range. Obviously, he clearly hadn't done anything in terms of an aggressive manner to look like he was going to do anything.
But that doesn't mean the whole force is racist. We're talking about one... Maybe we're just talking about one road.
What they're saying, but the people are saying, so at the funeral, there was a real anger. They were saying that it's endemic, it's within the force, because there's just this dislike of the whole immigration situation that's happened in France.
And there has been a recent study in France by a French journalist who went undercover with the police and came back with the verdict that they were institutionally
Well, that's just one reporter's experience, isn't it? I mean, it's not a massive study against all 45,000 coppers in France. But parking that to one side, can it spread over to the UK? I don't think that it's right to conflate what's happening in France at the moment with the potential of like a summer of...
Why?
Well, because I don't think there's any evidence. We haven't seen massive, if you like, ghettos in city centres or on the outskirts of city centres.
But my point is
that are currently being harassed by the cops and having incidents like that caught on film.
But my point is that we need to get a handle on this. We need to get a hold of the situation that we're in, because as Nigel pointed out, they have a very large immigrant population, and that has probably angered a lot of people there living there simply because of the lack of cohesion. And I'm saying that in terms of our own immigration policy, there there are too many elements that are going to get angered by the situation. The immigrants themselves, or the asylum seekers themselves, being housed for years in things like army barracks and so on and so forth. That's, you know, really seriously, this cannot be the way they move forward.
Well, that's what speed.
So that's what I'm saying. And then there's other elements. So you've got the people themselves who live in these areas who are getting angry at the fact that their areas are being infiltrated by people who've come here in a way, a lot of them via dinghy, and they're not happy with that. And then, of course, there are those who are not being prioritised in this country, and it's proven that actually if you are coming here by dinghy, you're going to be housed, you're going to be helped. But there are a lot of homeless people, a lot of people who are ex-army soldiers and people like that who are not being assisted. And I'm saying that we are creating a melting pot of anger, and we have to be careful that we don't end up spilling over into violence.
Which is what I think might happen, and that's one of the reasons why it's really important. Forget about Rwanda or any of those gimmicks. You've got to speed up those asylum applications. You've got to clear the backlog. You've got to find a way of people being able to apply outside the country for asylum, safe routes to get here, just simply dampen the whole problem down.
Because what you're getting is silos of people in different areas that aren't integrated. So a silo of people in this army barracks, a silo of people here, and they're all immigrants who are getting. The French problem was that there was no cohesion. So these people were in separate areas and elements, so it became almost like ghettoised. And what I'm saying is, if we don't get people processed and disperse them quickly and let them get used to assimilate to our environment, we're going to face the same problem.
The only time I can remember in recent living memory was when there was a backlash, when there was, if you like, quote-unquote, English, white, indigenous, working-class lads rioting, and that was in the northwest, and I can't remember the town, and they were rioting, and again, it was like a race riot. It was like a race war, and that was the only time I've seen, and I'm going to use lazily the word white lads rioting. So when you see a riot in the UK or in France, generally speaking, it's from an impoverished group of immigrants. So whether it's in London, when the Mark Duggan shooting, or whether it's in Birmingham, and about 10, 12 years ago, there was rioting, a race riot, although the BBC were reluctant to call it that, between the Asian community and the black community. It's never really, if you like, lazily, white English lads rioting. So I can't see white English lads rioting in protest to mass migration from asylum seekers.
You've seen the football matches before.
But that's not a political riot, is it? That's a tribal football riot.
But the point is that if we create these silos of people who exist in separate entities of this country, so you've got people in different areas, but they're all migrants housed in separate places, then you lack the cohesion, the social cohesion that comes with sort of getting people all in individually and assimilating them all around the country.
Well,
that's the problem.
You need to change policy before it happens rather than in response to it. I mean, the last riots I can remember where that happened was the poll tax riots, and we got rid of the poll tax.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So thank you for that, Nigel. Right. Well, what are your thoughts? Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. On the way, it's this week's Outside. Now, with Wimbledon around the corner, it's only fitting that my mystery guest won the tournament back in 1977. Now, her career spanned 26 years, winning 3 major singles titles for Great Britain. Who do you think she is? She will be live at 5. But before that, it's time for our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, would you be happy with a pylon in your backyard? Send me your thoughts. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. There's a poll-up right now asking that very question. Would you be happy with a pylon in your backyard? Cast your vote now.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. It's fast approaching 24 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Now, before the break, we were discussing the French riots. Let's see what you've been saying. Michael says the damage being done to other people's property by these rioters is disgusting. Cars and coaches being torched, shop windows being smashed, shops set on fire. Very true. Martin says this has been brewing for years. France is having their own George Floyd moment. Yes, Barbara says what is happening in France is an I can't say that.
Abomination.
It's an abomination. Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for putting in that hand grenade, Barbara. Appreciate that. Right now it's time for the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, would you be happy with a pylon in your back garden? I'm not meaning the social media kind or any other kind. The government is planning to fast-track planning applications for hundreds of miles of overhead cables and pylons to reach net zero by 2050. But is Britain prepared for an onslaught of cables and steel outside our windows? Is our infrastructure actually built to support such targets? By achieving one climate change goal, are we actually effectively destroying the environment? Currently, the UK generates up to 14 gigawatts of energy from offshore wind farms. The government's net zero plan includes raising that to 50 gigawatts by 2030. Now, if the government didn't impose expensive installations like heat pumps, perhaps we wouldn't need as many pylons in the first place. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, would you be happy with a pylon in your backyard? Keep it clean. So joining me to discuss is Lois Perry, she's Director of CART 24. Jane...
26.
20, did I say 24?
Yeah.
I was thinking of your age.
Oh, no, you say all the right things, Nana.
Jane, Lucy, political commentator Matthew Stadlin, and former Brexit Party MEP Martin Daubney. Right, I'm going to start actually with you, Lucy. Jane.
I would definitely have one in my back garden, but let's be clear: the chances of it literally being your back garden is not really what's going to be proposed here. And the reason for it to be within my visible eyesight, which is much more likely to be the correct circumstances, is because it's going to be one of these measures that is going to help us decarbonise our energy grid.
which means reducing cost of energy. We've obviously seen, in the last 18 months, energy go through the roof. We don't want to see that happen again, and for that to be happening on a sustained way. It also will give us more security over our energy, so relying less on foreign imports. And beyond energy, there's obviously an impact on things like our insurance with risk of floods, access to good quality produce and a variety of produce. All these things that go hand in hand with climate change are going to be addressed by enabling the national grid to have the infrastructure it needs to boost more renewable generation and the electrification of transport.
Interesting. I mean, I'd have thought that if there is an opportunity, and in this country, obviously, the big thing for us would be flooding, a pylon would actually be the last thing that you want up there. Let's go to Lois Perry.
Yeah, and there's so many things wrong with what you've just said. With respect, I literally don't know where to start. Number one, having electricity powering absolutely everything will increase our reliance on electricity coming in from the rest of Europe. It will make us less energy secure. The more renewables we have on the grid, the less reliable our energy sources are. I mean, if we were actually serious about this, we'd be increasing our nuclear capacity so that we could reserve our gas for our heating and our oil for our transport, and maybe even electrify city transport. But no, this is absolutely crazy. We've tried all these technologies in the past, 100 years ago, windmills and all of that. We've moved on from that. And as for the whole climate change stuff, come on. You must know that is nonsense.
Well, I'm going to have to give her a right to reply there. Jane, Lois says that the cold climate stuff is nonsense.
I can't agree with that at all. There's so much overwhelming scientific evidence in support of climate change, and to want to compare technology to what existed 100 years ago to today and, in the next 100 years, I mean, we're going to be living in totally different worlds from that technology change. And, it's not just sort of gas in terms of our gas used for things like heating, but there's also gas used in certain types of electricity generation. And, of course, we've seen what's happened with the gas prices with Russia and Ukraine.
That's because of net zero, though. Net zero policies have pushed energy prices.
But I don't understand how not increasing the ability to have homegrown renewable generation is not a better solution to all of that.
All right, well, let's get Matthew Stadlen in. Matthew Stadlen.
Yeah, just very quickly to spell it out. You don't need me to do it. The world's getting hotter. We know that. We know that we are contributing towards that. We know we have to do something about it. Do I like pylons? Would I like pylons not just in my backyard, but in the British countryside? Absolutely, ideally not. They're very ugly. And happen, and this is a very personal thing, and a lot of people who do accept the science on climate change might disagree with me about that, and it is a subjective thing. I don't happen to like wind turbines either. I think they're scarring the British landscape as well. But we can't wish the climate crisis away. We have to do something about it. We need good law. We need responsible and serious law that shouldn't be rushed through without debate, without proper scrutiny, but we do need to change.
Martin Daubney.
Net zero is economic suicide for the liberal West. It's been proven we need to be energy sovereign, but we can't rely on wind turbines because the wind stops. Solar panels get too hot when it's too hot. These technologies are unreliable, they're expensive to manufacture. Look at the carbon footprint of wind turbines and the fact we can't even recycle solar panels. They are toxic and poisonous. We have the answer. The future is beneath our feet. We have trillions of cubic metres of shale. We have trillions of cubic metres of North Sea oil.
Yes.
Norway, just 300 miles to the north of Aberdeen, has a nationalised energy grid that people pay low prices for and is totally dependable, not on the climate, not on despots like Putin, but on their own energy sovereignty. That's what we need to do. We need more pylons because we're putting offshore wind farms in places where we currently don't need to be supplied from. We have existing power stations, existing pylons that can cope with demand All we've got to do is rev up. Let's go nuclear, let's go shale. The future is beneath our feet. Net zero is making people net poorer.
Absolutely. And also with the planning regulations, how come they can fast-track planning regulations for this, but they can't do it for fracking? You know, it's a complete nonsense. And, you know, why are we doing any of this in the first place? We have the absolute perfect energy mix. There's no reason for this. It is basically a complete scam, like carbon capture. It's an unnecessary resolution to an unexistent problem.
So, Nana, can I just jump in quickly on that? It's, I think, really important to differentiate between two things, right? So, shale, gas, fracking, all that sort of stuff, really bad. Not good for the local environment, not good for people who live there, but definitely not good for the environment. Nuclear, that's a debate worth having. Nuclear energy is relatively clean, and if you're prepared to take the risk of the fallout, should there be a disaster, then there's very little argument against nuclear.
I want to bring Jane back in there. Jane Lucy, your thoughts on what you're hearing?
Yeah. I agree there needs to be a combination in terms of solutions. So, yes, I think there is a role for nuclear alongside renewables, but I also agree that fracking is absolutely not the right solution. It causes environmental harm, and I think there's enough evidence scientifically and from people like the National Grid ESO, who even have independent consultants helping guide them in terms of the different options, that we've got to be looking at a combination of solutions that deliver carbon reduction, but also keep control over cost. Cost is absolutely key for many people. We've got record levels of fuel poverty in this country, but we also can do that hand in hand with carbon reduction. And some of the things that are being discussed at the moment are not delivering reducing cost, and they're not delivering the required carbon reduction and supporting the status quo.
Well, what about, Jane, what about the environmental damage and impact on things on the environment, wind turbines and also the other stuff, and also the pylons? Lois?
Yeah, I mean, it's very well documented, the damage that wind turbines, if they're in near people's homes and stuff, can affect their mental health, their sleeping, they kill birds. I mean, there's a huge amount of evidence that... And also, it looks absolutely horrific. It destroys the look of the countryside. It destroys if you live on the coast. That affects people's mental health, 100%.
So final, very quickly, yes or no, Matthew Stadlen, a pylon in your backyard, yes or no?
Only if we absolutely have
yes or
to.
No, yes or no? You've not said yes or no. Yes or no?
On the fence.
Yes or no, that wasn't an option. Yes or no? Come on.
Yeah.
OK, Mark Thornley. Yes
Absolutely no, we don't need them.
Lois Perry.
No.
And Jane Lucy.
An emphatic yes.
Oh, God. Well, they should be coming to a house near your house. Thank you very much, Lois Perry, Director of Car 26, Jane Lucy, CEO of Purse Technology and ex-founder of Labrador, Matthew Stadlen and also Martin Daubney. Thank you for your thoughts. We'll keep your thoughts coming as you listen here on GB News. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News Live on TV, on radio and on digital radio. I've said that before. After the break, we'll continue with the Great British Debate. I'm asking, would you be happy with a pylon in your backyard? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, also GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 4:34. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The French government will hold emergency talks this evening to address the civil unrest after a fifth night of riots. More than 700 people were arrested across the country overnight, with tear gas used to disperse crowds in Marseille. In Paris, an attempted murder investigation has been opened after a mayor's home was ram-raided and set alight. His wife and one of his children were hurt. 2 people have been killed and 3 are in a critical condition after a mass shooting in the US state of Maryland. Police say up to 30 people were injured in the city of Baltimore, where people had gathered for an event called Brooklyn Day. Nothing's yet known about the attacker or the possible motive. The US President will meet King Charles and the Prime Minister when he visits the UK next week. Buckingham Palace has confirmed Joe Biden will visit Windsor Castle on the 10th of July. The White House says he's travelling to London to strengthen the close relationship between the nations. He'll then head to Lithuania for the NATO summit before going on to Finland. 5 Just Stop Oil activists have been charged with behaviour likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress after being arrested for disrupting London's Pride March yesterday. Police say 2 other men have been released on bail pending further inquiries. And the NHS has seen a steep rise in its demand for gambling addiction services. Health officials are particularly concerned about touch-of-a-button bets, saying children and adults are being bombarded with gambling ads. New specialist clinics are being opened across the country after nearly 1,400 patients were referred last year. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, it's back to Nana.
Thank you very much, Rhiannon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, coming up just after 5 o'clock in Outside, with Wimbledon around the corner, it's only fitting that my mystery guest should be such as this amazing woman. She won the tournament back in 1977. She has won 3 major single titles in total, as well as 4 doubles for Great Britain. And one of her greatest competitors used to be the one and only Billie Jean King. So who is she? Keep your thoughts coming, gbviews@gbnews.com. But before that, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, would you be happy with a pylon in your backyard?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. If you've just tuned in, welcome on board. It's just coming up to 41 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. And it's now time for our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, would you be happy with a pylon in your backyard? The government is planning to fast-track planning applications for overhead cables and pylons so Britain can reach net zero by 2050. All I keep seeing is that I think there was some sort of advert years ago when somebody kicked a ball at the pylon, or you used to get these adverts warning you to be careful you don't get caught on one of these. They're ghastly. But is Britain prepared for the onslaught of cables and steel outside our windows? Do we actually want that? I mean, is Britain's infrastructure built to support such targets? By achieving one climate change goal, are we actually, in effect, destroying the environment in our wake? If the government didn't impose expensive installations like heat pumps, perhaps we wouldn't need this nonsense in the first place. You can obviously hear where I stand on it. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, would you be happy with a pylon in your backyard? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined now by broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly and also senior GB News political commentator Nigel Nelson. Danny Kelly, I'm going to start with you. A pylon in your backyard.
What a horrible, big, ugly lump of an unwanted, unnecessary structure.
Are you talking about yourself?
And I'm not talking about... and on to the question of the day.
He set himself up for that
No one would be happy. And I disbelieve one of your earlier contributors said that she would be happy having a pylon. What a load of baloney. That's the thing with people. They talk a great game,
no,
but everybody...
She meant it.
Having a massive structure in the back...
She said it'd be all right, but she said it would be unlikely in her backyard, probably once she accepted it.
I don't think...
see it through the window.
I don't think anyone would be happy. Would they tolerate it? Happiness and toleration are completely different things. Horrible, big, ugly thing. And this drive for the 2050, I can only speak generally, but in my circle of family and friends, I don't know anyone who actually wants any of this garbage. I don't. These heat pumps. I don't know anyone who wants a heat pump or who can afford one, who've got the space for them. People want to burn fossil fuels. I'm ever so sorry, but in the real world, and I'm speaking broadly, and in my circle of friends and family, they're fed up with this 2050 thing.
OK. Firstly, no, I wouldn't want one in my back garden either. No. However, I think I might have to accept one.
Why?
Because if we're going to get to net zero by 2050, we are all going to have to make sacrifices, both financial, both inconvenience, and having possibly a pylon stuck outside your front door. And it does seem to me that the problem at the moment is that people don't understand how urgent the climate crisis is. You've got something like 300 ice blocks the size of London double-decker buses falling off the ice sheets and melting every second. That means nothing to people. What does it mean here? Next year we're going to we'll probably hit 1.5 degrees centigrade. The droughts will be longer. The rainstorms will be heavier.
But if we have got heavier rainstorms, I've got to stop you there, Nigel. It sounds like some apocalyptic thing that's going on.
No, but
I can hear music and fire as you're speaking.
But that's my point, really, that the rain will be a bit heavier, but you won't notice it as sort of something apocalyptic, as you're suggesting. So, as a vote winner, this is the real problem. We cannot sell climate change. That is just proved, really. However, if we do believe in it, if we believe in net zero, we are going to have to make these sacrifices.
May I just come back at that? I'm not a climate change denier, and my circle of friends understand and recognise that climate change is happening. My point is that it's pointless. We're punishing ourselves when we're responsible for like 1% of global emissions. Listen, we're preaching to the converted in this country. I'm talking about the rest of the world. What we're doing, it's pointless if we don't get people like China and Pakistan and India and, to a certain extent, America on board. We are punishing... We're smacking ourselves in the face.
You're absolutely right. It's a global problem.
So why should we punish ourselves?
Well, because if everyone takes that attitude, we're not going to solve it. So a small change in China, for instance, will have much more effect on the climate than a big change in Britain. So you're absolutely right. But if we don't all start doing our bit, it's like...
we're doing our bit.
Well, we're not doing enough to get to actually the target of 2050.
Let China do something. It's pointless.
Yeah, but Nigel, OK, so this is a very laudable aim. I believe the climate is changing. I don't think this is the way to do it. If we think we can affect it in some way, I don't actually think we can as much as we believe we can. I don't think really that we have that much power to change it, to affect it. I think it does its own balancing act anyway. But I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, OK, so I go along with this. What about the environmental impact? Why is the environmental impact just ignored? The environmental impact of putting up one of these pylons, not only to our own mental health, but the health of the animals and the environment. What about these ridiculous... It's getting ridiculous. We're going to build these monstrosities across the UK, hundreds of miles of them, and we're not batting an eyelid. We think that's fine to destroy the environment. We're going to pull up these charging points and knock out all this concrete and do all this, but we're not batting an eyelid about the environmental impact. As long as the air... I think that what we're doing is we're causing one problem after another. It's like taking medication. You've got to work out how much you can take before it causes another problem. And I think we're creating this... The solution to this is worse than the actual thing itself. Right, let's see what you think, though. The show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our Great British Voices, your opportunity to be on the show and tell us what you think about the topics we're discussing. Let's go to Kidderminster. Have you got pylons there, John? Have you got pylons at Kidderminster?
Yeah, we certainly have, Nana, and actually what a wonderful thing they are to have. If somebody could put one in my back garden, I'd be absolutely delighted, given the size of the garden. But let's assume that they could. You know, the rental I would get from having that pylon there would be absolutely wonderful, probably better than the pension I'm currently getting. But I can see that we need to work towards net zero. And I noticed the year that they're aiming at is 2050. Well, I'll be 102 that year, so that'll be a good step in the right direction. And as regards global warming, what a marvellous thing that is, you know. As I see it, if we have global warming, I won't have to go to the Mediterranean for my holidays. I'll only need to go down to the West Country or the South Coast. So I won't need aeroplanes or anything like that. It'd be much simpler. If ever I was to go on a battery-powered car and drive to the South Coast and maybe sleep in a tent or something, the cost of it would be tremendous. It'd be very much lower than what we're currently doing. And yes, I'm all for it. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful idea. And as soon as this Tory government puts it in place, I'll be delighted.
Thank you very much, John Reid. I think he's been slightly sarcastic on some of that. John Reid, lovely to talk to you as ever. That is John Reid in Kidderminster. I mean, seriously, look, we won't have to spend so much on heating, so there's less carbon emissions through our heating. Maybe the planet is warming us up just so we don't have to spend all our money on a lot of this nonsense that we're spending on. But frankly, I don't fancy a pylon in my backyard. Let's have a look. I've been asking, would you be happy with one in yours? Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts. Steve said, pylons to do what? We cannot generate the electricity. Good point. Dawn says, a cleaner planet full of metal pylons and metal windmills and solar panels on an industrial scale is not cleaner at all. It's not... It's not a place any of us want to live. In misery, in poverty. Oh, Dawn, that is, isn't it? Dawn is just like a new Dawn thing. Is this not dawning on the government? What a nonsense idea. Andy says, why can't they make pylons more attractive first? Well, that would help. But frankly, a lot of countries put them underground because it's dangerous for them to be overground, especially if you have things like earthquakes and floods. If you have floods, which is potentially what will be happening in this country in many years to come, a pylon is the last thing you want. Electrified cables in water. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Coming up, it's this week's Outside. With Wimbledon around the corner, it's only fitting our mystery guest won the tournament back in 1977. She's won 3 major singles titles as well as 4 doubles for Great Britain. She regularly battled it out with the one and only Billie Jean King and is now a regular tennis pundit. But who is she? Before that, though, it's Worldview. We'll be getting the latest news from across the globe. Don't go anywhere. That's next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. This is GB News live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome if you just joined me. It's time now for World View. And according to recent Russian reports, state media has actually ignored the fact that ordinary Russians in Rostov-on-Don allegedly supported Wagner's mutiny. And that's as the CIA director allegedly called the FSB to assure that the US had nothing to do with the coup. So joining me to talk about all of this and to dissect and explain it all, because it sounds a bit gobbledygooky, is Russian journalist Alexei Ver. Alexei, thank you very much for joining us. He's live in Russia. Now, a week ago, Russia survived an armed coup attempt. How has it changed Moscow's relationships with the West? And what are the reactions that you've been getting from both sides?
Hello, Nana. Well, last week's armed coup attempt, what Nassim Taleb would probably call a black swan. Completely predictable, and yet nobody expected it. And more than that, it was a complete game changer. One thing this armed rebellion by Wagner troops didn't change is probably Russia's relationship with the West. Well, Moscow did reserve to its usual narrative, accusing the West of rejoicing at Russia's troubles. At the same time, as you said, CIA chief William Burns did contact the Russian colleagues letting them know that America had nothing to do with the coup. Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov commented on the situation, saying that Russian special services will investigate if the CIA, MI6, or any other Western intelligence agencies were involved in this coup preparation. At the same time, he said that Moscow's allies have supported Russia. By Moscow allies, I think we should imply mostly African nations and other countries as Turkey, Iran, Kazakhstan, or Russia's friends. And when it comes to the rest of the world, apparently Russia doesn't care, according to Russia's top diplomat, and it's not going to change Russia's relations with the West in any way.
Well, what about the ordinary Russians? How did they react to the whole situation? Have they just moved on with their lives now?
Well, I can speak for all Russians. I can speak for myself. I did move on with my life. You know, Nana, living in Russia, you kind of get used to this certain level of absurdity because some events in our life just turn out to be surreal. Last week's coup attempt, though, did take this level of absurdity to a whole new level because just think about it. What is the symbol of the Wagner's failed coup attempt? It's a tank stuck in the gates of Rostov Circus. Isn't it ridiculous? Can it get any more ridiculous than that? If I was watching on this, on, I don't know, some Netflix TV show, I would say, nah, that can happen in real life. I think most Russians can relate to this feeling when we just watch a Hollywood movie and we say, that's not how we are. But, well, without pointing fingers, you can just look at some of the faces of the heroes of this story. And, well, to me, they do look like Hollywood villains. I just hope they will stay away from Russia and won't bother us anymore.
Well, Alexei V, it's really good to talk to you. We're running out of time. I'd love to have spoken to you for longer. We will try and get you on for longer next time. Alexei V there in Moscow talking live. He's a Russian journalist. Well, let's travel over to America now. Head over to Los Angeles and speak to the host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Duddridge. It's very practiced, me saying Politics People podcast. It's not easy. Paul, welcome. Now, Trump, let's talk Trump, because he holds his first rally since the espionage indictment. And talk to me about what's been going on.
Well, yes, it's been a chock-filled week. Trump came back after his, 37 indictments? 37 indictments, and you'd think that would dent his popularity. Yesterday, he held a rally in South Carolina, the first proper rally since we've had those indictments. And he only managed to get a 20,000 crowd, 15,000 of whom were there 2 hours before. They were queuing up from 8 o'clock in the morning. The town he held, this is Pickens, South Carolina, the town he held the rally in has only got a population of 3,000. It was like a conservative Glastonbury. It was an amazing turnout yesterday. And he's back on cracking form, and he's very, very punchy, shall we say. He's definitely taking the fight to the Dems. He's openly in the speech saying, look, I will take any punishment they throw at me because they have to come through me to get to you, kind of thing. So he's he's enjoying a very good run at the moment, very riding high in the polls. He's 52% just among, I think with YouGov, he's 4 points ahead of Biden. He's 52 points support in the Republican voters. So everything's actually coming up Trump's for Trump at the moment. But he has just been. The witch hunt continues, by the way. I just said there was 37 charges. They're just about to bring between 30 and 45 more charges. The Department of Justice are about to throw even more at him. So Halloween's coming early, witch hunt in full swing.
Now, what about Biden? Because he twice claimed that Putin is losing the war in Iraq. Yeah.
Putin is so on the ball. He's so ahead of the game. You've got your Russia correspondent there. Your Russia correspondent had no idea that Putin's losing the war in Iraq. And you might have think it was just a slip of the tongue, but he said it 2 days. He said it 2 days running. He said it 2 days running.
Oh, dear.
Now, this is a person. Well, anyway, like I said, President Biden is doing really well. Her husband, Joe, has completely lost it. He now thinks that Russia is at war and is losing the war specifically in Iraq. And nobody seems to be trying to correct him or apologize anymore. The whole thing is just, it's like the last day of school where you can bring in coloring books at the White House at the moment. So he is, he's leading the free world at the moment, and we should all feel safe.
Well, I doubt that we will do with Joe Biden at the helm. Thank you so much, Paul Dudgeridge. Really good to talk to you. Paul Dudgeridge, host of the Politics People podcast. Now, on the subject of pylons, I love this one. Ronald Sild, he sent a message. He said, pylons in your back garden is not a joke. High voltage and electrostatics fields causing through your body 24/7, including when you're in bed, is sheer stupidity in relation to developing cancers. What about kids playing in the garden all day? As a former radio and electronics engineer, I would certainly not buy or want my house in close proximity to one of these. In fields where they belong, that's fine, but not crossing my house. So there you go. So that's maybe the government need to have a think about that. This is GB News. Very excited in the next hour. A fabulous outside guest. All of that on the way after 5. So good afternoon. It's just gone 5 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Now, for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. In just a moment, I will be joined by a British tennis legend. She won Wimbledon back in 1977. She is an absolute fantastic player. She was also the most recent British tennis player to win a major singles tournament until Andy Murray won the 2012 US Open and was the most recent British woman to have won a major singles title with Emma Raducanu, who won the 2021 US Open. She's a huge celebrity, a huge star. She will be live in a couple of moments' time. Then, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should we renationalise the water industry? But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 5. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The French government will hold crisis talks this evening to address the civil unrest after a 5th night of riots. More than 700 people were arrested across the country overnight, with tear gas used to disperse crowds in Marseille. The violence follows the death of teenager Nahel Mazouk, who was shot dead by police on Tuesday. In the capital, there was a huge police presence protecting the Champs-Élysées. The city's regional president, Valérie Pécresse, says security is being boosted and she's confident order will be restored.
What's happening is ultra-violence by small groups of people that are very well organized and very well trained, and they want to defy the Republic. And the Republic will not yield, and we will fight back.
Well, the regional president also met a mayor whose home was ram-raided and set alight in a Parisian suburb. His wife and one of his children were hurt. Prosecutors say an attempted murder investigation has now been opened. French journalist Antonin André says it's put more pressure on President Emmanuel Macron.
His family were attacked in his house during the night, and his wife and his 2 children had to left the house in emergency because there was fire in the house. And this is what is a very shocking thing this morning. And every mayors in France wants that the state and Emmanuel Macron take more measures to stop the chaos.
Well, some British tourists in the capital say they do still feel safe despite the unrest.
We checked out the news. We think it's absolutely fine. There's so many things going on in the world. If you listen to everything, you'd never travel.
We've been to Paris before. It's got the same feel about it. You can see that it's still a lovely city, and we haven't come across any problems.
2 people have been killed and 3 are in a critical condition after a mass shooting in the US state of Maryland. Police say up to 30 people suffered gunshot wounds during the attack, which took place in the city of Baltimore, where people had gathered for an event called Brooklyn Day. The suspect or suspects are reportedly still at large. The US President will meet King Charles and the Prime Minister when he visits the UK next week. Buckingham Palace has confirmed Joe Biden will visit Windsor Castle on the 10th of July. The White House says he's travelling to London to strengthen the close relationship between the nations. He'll then head to Lithuania for the NATO summit before going to Finland. New measures to deal with disruptive demonstrations have come into force. They include expanded police powers to move on static or slow-walking protests like those used by Just Stop Oil. A criminal offence to tackle disruption in tunnels has also been introduced, carrying jail terms of up to 3 years. Critics say the laws threaten the right to protest. Meanwhile, 5 Just Stop Oil activists have been charged with behaviour likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress. They were arrested for disrupting London's Pride March yesterday. 2 others were released on bail pending further inquiries. The government says it's determined to stop migrant boats coming to Britain despite the legal setback. Ministers are preparing to appeal a court decision which blocked the deportation of asylum seekers to Rwanda. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says if nothing is done to stop the boats, the costs could spiral, reaching up to £11 billion.
I think your viewers want the government to take action. That is what we're doing. We're doing so in a way that clearly complies with the legal process. But it's important we now take this to the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister, the Home Secretary are determined to stop the boats. And if we don't, then there'll be a huge cost.
Well, Barrister Lord Carlisle says the proposal is unlawful.
Government is not upholding the law, and they've approached this whole bill in a completely legally non-compliant way. The basis of this bill is that there is a safe country or safe countries to send refugees to, but in fact they're only offering one safe country, and that's Rwanda. So the proposal is in tatters, it is unlawful, it is leading to people being kept in custody when they should not be kept in custody.
And rail passengers are facing yet more disruption over the next week. ASLEF members at 16 train companies in England will refuse to work overtime, which operators rely on to run their full timetable. The union says it's calling for fair pay, but the rail delivery group says ASLEF rejected its last offer of a £5,000 raise, which would bring the basic salary for drivers working a 4-day week to nearly £65,000. Services will be affected from Monday through to Saturday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Nana.
Good afternoon, welcome on board. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, and also GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Now, still to come, I'm very excited because every Sunday at 5 o'clock I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP or someone who's had an extremely interesting career. We take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And today, my guest is a very, very, very special woman. She's won 3 tennis majors, including Wimbledon in 1977, and her career spanned across 26 years. She was ranked as high as number 2 in the world and in the singles tournament and number 1 in the doubles. She's regularly featured as a pundit on television during the Grand Slam tournaments. Can anyone guess who this might be? I know Kathleen's got it right. Kathleen, well done. And then it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, should we renationalise the water industry? Lord Michael Howard, one of the architects of the privatisation of water, has said that it would be a mistake to renationalise it. This comes after it was announced that Thames Water had accumulated over £14 billion worth of debt. So what do you think? Is the best way forward to nationalise? And then Prince William and Prince Harry both attended the annual Diana Awards separately by sending in 2 pre-recorded videos. Does this suggest that the brothers are even more divided than was first thought? Well, email me your views at gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. So I've got to say, it's time for this week's Outside, and I've got to say a very, very exciting guest will be joining us live. But I just want to come to some of your emails and messages that you sent me with regard to pylons. And I thought this was quite interesting here, because I've had some engineers sending me ideas and thoughts as well. Caroline says, go, Nana, thank goodness you... Oh, I won't say that. I won't read that one, Caroline, actually. With regards to global warming, Suraj says, we enjoy our staunch, robust anti-global warming stance. Why don't GB explain the Milankovic cycles? This will differentiate your channel from all the other establishment-owned and influenced channels. Interesting. I'll have to go and have a look at that. I don't know what that means, but I'm sure somebody else could tell me. But there's quite a few of you who have guessed who my guest is. My this week's Outside guest. I've got to say well done to Ralph as well. You got it right, because it's time for this week's Outside. My special mystery guest was a female British tennis star. She's won 3 Grand Slams over her career, including the US Open, the Australian Open and the coveted Wimbledon title as well. She was the most recent British female tennis player to have won a Grand Slam until Emma Raducanu stormed to victory in the 2021 US Open final. Our tennis star played against some of the sporting greats, including Betty Stove and Billie Jean King, Chris Evert Lloyd, or Chris Evert now. In 1982, she became the first woman ever to be elected to the Wimbledon committee, and her career spanned a total of 26 years, and she now features regularly as a tennis pundit in major tournaments. Tomorrow's Wimbledon kicks off, so I thought it would be fitting to have this wonderful woman in the hot seat. Who better than today, my mystery guest being Virginia Wade. Virginia Wade, wow, so great. Wonderful.
That was a fabulous talk-up for me. I feel quite embarrassed, actually. You know, I'm still very involved in tennis, but not to the same extent I was. So, you know, I live in the present, and I forget that I did all those things. But what a great sport. Wimbledon is about to happen.
Do you know, it's so... I'm slightly starstruck, to be honest, because I used to watch you. I used to watch you playing against the likes of Chris Evert and all that, and they were, when I was young, they were the big tennis stars. The day tennis was... It still is, actually, and always still is a really big, big game, isn't it? And everyone, all eyes go to Wimbledon. What made you decide to be a tennis player to begin with?
You know, sometimes the profession decides you. You know, I just love to play tennis. I was competitive. My elder sister and my brother played, and so I wanted to play. And then once I played, I found I was pretty good, and that was all I really wanted to do, although my father insisted that I finish university before I went full-time. So my career was a little bit later than anybody's career is now. But, you know, in some ways, it's the same as today's world, but in many ways it's so different. There are so many great players, so it's sort of like a real privilege to know that we were in that burgeoning time when the game, and especially the women's game, just blossomed. So in the 70s, you know, it was huge. I don't think today's players realize quite how big tennis was in the 70s, you know. And then when Bjorn Borg, for example, came along, and everybody would go and they'd be wearing the little feeler outfits and that. And, you know, it's just gone from strength to strength. It's a fantastic sport. It's good for everybody. And it's great that we've got a lot of young British players doing well now.
Yeah, about time, really. But when you were starting out in tennis, because it was quite, I know it was very big when we were younger, but there was a real differentiation between the women's game and the men's game. Have you noticed that things have changed, and now the women's tennis is coming up to the same sort of, because the men got paid more, everything was bigger and geared towards the men. Some people didn't even want to watch women's tennis. I loved it all. But have you seen that gap close and things change?
Well, the only place where that gap has been a little bit slow to change, to equalize with the men and women, is still on the slow clay courts of Europe, because the men's game might be a little bit more stimulating on the slow clay, whereas on the faster courts, I think, to be honest, the women's game is a much better visual thing, because, you know, the men is boom, 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 and there are no rallies, where the women's, they are so good, these players today, and you get them. I mean, I've just been watching Eastbourne and all the grass court tournaments, and I mean, I will keep up to date with all the time. It's fascinating, because there's still more strategy, I think, in the women's game, because they don't have that just brute strength. But they're strong now. Boy, they hit serves at 125 miles an hour. I mean, I think I had a fast serve. I had a big serve, and I might have clocked it at 105 if I was lucky. But, you know, that was with a much smaller racket, with a wooden racket. So the technology has changed things by huge amounts.
It really, really has. And if you were to pinpoint it, because obviously what you've achieved is quite incredible, and you know, when you hear it, do you think, crikey, I did all that, I actually did all that, that's me? When you hear that, is that what sort of goes through your mind? Wow.
You know, once in a while it goes through your mind. Once in a while you think, if I had today's equipment and I was started lessons when I was 4 years old and had different technique and had a two-handed backhand and a big racket, and I would still be athletic. So that was one of my big strengths. So I guess I would be up there, but you know, it's a different game, and you think, oh my goodness, I couldn't hold a candle to today's players. But if you put yourself in the same era, I think it's interesting. You know, good athletes are always going to be good athletes, and there were, you know, I was always sort of close to the top. I was never number one. We had the fantastic Martina Navratilova and Steffi Graf and Chris Evert and Billie Jean and Maria Bueno, all those before. So it was exciting times even then, and great crowds. And Wimbledon has always supported the women, which has been fantastic and given them equal status. It took a while to get equal money. But I think, you know, you have to bide your time. Sometimes you better not to rush things too much. So I think everything's going along very well at the moment.
It was like a magical time, though, that particular era in tennis, because of those amazing, great players, you know, as you said, Bjorn Borg. You must have played and met these people. What was it like for you being in that?
I think it was actually, I have to consider that it was a really great era to be involved in, because I actually crossed over from the amateur stage when you traveled all around the world, you stayed with people, you made tons and tons of friends, whereas, you know, now it's a bit more sterile. You have your little group of entourage, and I don't think you interact quite as much now. So, and there's always pressure. There's always pressure. So whether the vast amounts of money, and because the competition is so dense and so tense now, I suppose there is more pressure. But there was always pressure, you know, and that's one of the psychological things that's so incredible about tennis. The game is so psychological.
It is.
That the mental aspect is so important, and if you can believe in yourself, I think you can go far. Would you say a long time?
Would you say that is the element that's often missing in a lot of the British players, that psychological ability to get through it? Because if you watch, it was always, because we would always watch the British game, we think, oh, they're going to crumble, they're not going to get through, they always crack. Do you think that that's been a major issue in British tennis in particular? Because when I watch it, that's what I see.
Yeah, no, I see that too, but I see it with a lot of players. There's certain players at the moment, even with the guys. I mean, I think somebody like Fritz, who is such a good, Taylor Fritz is such a good player, and Sinner, who's such a good player, and, you know, I'm just taking a couple, but they look as if they're very tense on the court and not really enjoying it at the moment. And, you know, that's what happens. The edge of your game goes off. It's very hard to get the balance right of how much you compete and how much you work on your game. But I think that in the end, the one advice I would give is that, look, losing a match is not a global catastrophe. You know, there'll be another day. If you can get your winning and your losing into perspective, I think then you're not so afraid of losing. I mean, everybody feels the pressure. You know, it's funny because the lesser players will say, oh, well, the reason I lost is because I got nervous. Well, let me tell you, the top players get just as nervous. They maybe just better players. But it's a matter of getting that perspective and that balance right of not worrying too much, you know, and feeling that every match you have to go on, oh, it's life or death if you lose, which it really isn't.
Now, your biggest moment then, in your view, what was the biggest moment for you in tennis?
Was winning Wimbledon. No two ways about it. I mean, Wimbledon for me was the dream. I mean, it was Wimbledon was everything. It was the only thing when I was first growing up and, you know, watching tennis. I was brought up in South Africa until I was 15, so there wasn't television there, so you'd listen on the radio. So Wimbledon, and then when we first came to England, we rented a house just in Wimbledon, so it was unbelievable. You go and you see Wimbledon, and, you know, like some people's year will rotate around their birthday or something, mine would probably still does, rotates around Wimbledon. I just sort of try to keep myself not quite so emotionally involved as I used to be, but I love it.
Yeah, it's just such a good tournament. Who's catching your eye at the moment then? Who do you think is going to potentially win the women and the men's match? Who do you think's got a good chance? Who would you put money on if you were going to do that?
You know, I would probably go with in the women's with two of the big hitters, like the girl who won last year, Rebecca. She's fantastic, but she got sick in Paris, so you know she might be a little underplayed at the moment. Schwantegger is so good, but I don't know whether she's unbeatable on grass. And of course, Sabalenka could be really good in the women's. And then there are a myriad of other players who could compete. And on the men's, I mean, I'm not really, I just was looking at the draw again. I don't think that the real contenders who could have a chance against Djokovic, I don't think they're in top-notch form. So I think I can only see Djokovic winning.
You think Djokovic?
Yet again.
He's good, isn't he? He's very good. He's really good. Yeah. So outside of all of this then, because will you be commentating on Wimbledon this year as well? Will you be doing that?
I'm only doing bits and pieces. No, I decided a few years ago, you know, it's long hours, hard work, and, you know, I like to relax and enjoy it more.
Yeah. So what are you up to then? Are you retiring and relaxing? Or you?
Yeah, pretty much. You know, do bits and pieces here, but not too much. But life is busy and life is very good. So, and, you know, it's fun to talk to people like you.
Oh, Virginia Wade, it's so good to talk to you. I can't actually believe that I'm talking to you because I used to watch you on the tennis courts 30 years ago, Virginia. Thank you so much for sharing your story and taking time out to talk to me. It's been such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. That is the amazing Virginia Wade. Yes, former British tennis star, an icon, brilliant woman. She won Wimbledon in 1977. How cool is that? She was here live on GB News. But still to come, Prince William and Prince Harry both attended the annual Diana Awards separately by sending in 2 pre-recorded videos. I mean, she'd be horrified if she could see the way they have their relationship has deteriorated. Do you think that suggests that they're even talking to each other? But before that, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, should we renationalise the water industry? Stay tuned, that's next.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, welcome on board. If you've just tuned in, where have you been? It's fine. It's only 25 minutes after 5 o'clock. We've got loads still to come. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. It's time now for our great British debate this hour. And I'm asking, should we re-nationalise the water industry? Now, Thames Water is working constructively with shareholders to secure the funds to keep Britain's biggest water supplier afloat, pardon the pun, as the company finds itself swimming in £14 billion of debt. Now, ministers are said to be drawing up contingency plans for the company, and are we considering, what do you think? They're considering nationalising the business. Should it collapse? But Lord Howard, a key architect of privatisation of water, stands against putting the water sector into public ownership. So with sewage spills and Thames Water leaking a shocking 630 million litres of water every day from its ageing pipework network, many campaigners have argued that the water companies have mismanaged and abused the natural resource for vast profit. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should we re-nationalise the water industry? Well, joining me now is the leader of Social Democrat Party, William Clouston, political commentator Benedict Spence, former Labour MP Stephen Pound, and also editorial and research fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Len Shackleton. OK, so I'm going to start with you, William. What do you think? Is it time to start looking at nationalisation of this? This is a resource that we need. It's a vital necessity.
Oh, certainly, yeah. Privatisation of water, just like privatisation of the railways and then electricity supply, is a failed experiment. What we've ended up with is a series of companies absolutely laden with debt. Ofwat has watched this happen. These companies have been used as debt mules. You have the secondary problem of vastly overpaid executives getting £3 or £4 million a year. The person that runs Scottish Water doesn't get that. That's a nationalised industry. You've got a problem of dividends being siphoned off abroad, which harms our balance of payments. And above all, you've got these companies that have lost their focus. Their focus, because it's privatised, is dividends and not investment. And I think the whole thing has been a disaster. And these companies are in no position to implement the 50 or 60 billion pounds worth of investment that is required to stop shoving sewage into our waterways. So the whole thing is a shambles. And I would just remind anyone arguing against public ownership that public ownership of water is the natural situation around the whole world. This was an experiment that we tried and it's failed.
Well, a lot of people would agree with that. Stephen Pound, an experiment that's been tried out and failed.
I think, good afternoon, Anna.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, so, obviously, the first thing, we make Fergal Sharkey in charge of the whole operation. But look, there's a couple of things here that absolutely stink, even worse than the sewage that's being dumped in our local rivers. Firstly, 27 senior Ofwat executives now work for the water companies. It's the ultimate revolving door, and that is disgraceful. The second thing is that if we renationalise them tomorrow, we'd still be stuck with a huge amount of debt. And I think what Liv Garfield up at Severn Trent is doing is talking about they're having an emergency meeting, a secret, well, not so secret meeting of all the water company bosses to realise that now the game could well be up. And they're talking about repurposing themselves as sort of socially responsible companies. So in the short term, we can't renationalise it because the debt would just be horrendous. In the medium to long term, probably going to happen anyway, even if if it's not through legislation. But in the first case, what we've got to do is to regulate them all the way to honesty and probity. At the moment, the regulatory system is weak and it simply isn't working. We're going to regulate them. And I must admit, I'm with the great Nick Ferrari, who may not be your favourite broadcaster representing somebody else, but he said we should actually impose penal sanctions on them if they don't actually solve the problem.
So Stephen, you think they should be nationalised? Yes or no? Yes?
100%.
Yeah, 100%. OK, let's go to Benedict Spence.
I'm afraid you're not going to get much disagreement from me, simply because I understand the principle behind privatisation, and often it can work in some circumstances, but in this instance it hasn't. Now, partly that's because of circumstance. You know, we're dealing with outdated systems. You know, we don't have enough reservoirs. We don't build enough reservoirs. That's a separate conversation as to why we don't do that. But you know, in a lot of cities, things like pipe networks, they're very sort of out of date, and really a lot of the money that should be going and is being siphoned off in dividends should be going towards this sort of thing, but it's not. And I don't think you can therefore make a very good argument that privatization is making things more efficient when you do see the companies in that amount of debt, money being going to shareholders rather than going to service debt or indeed to improve the situation. And the problem is, if you're talking about water, it is a fundamental building block of existence. I know that this sort of sounds a little bit simplistic, but it's true. And the state, in my opinion, should be there for very few things, but probably the preservation and the supply of water, given that everybody needs that or they die in 3 days, and the livestock dies and everything else sort of collapses. It's sort of a fundamental thing that I think actually, if you were going to sort of line up the, say, 5 things that you'd want the state to do, I think running water, clean water, that would probably be pretty high up on the list of things it should provide.
Right, Len Shackleton.
Well, there's no doubt that the water industry is in a complete mess at the moment, but I think a large part of this is down to the regulator, Ofwat, who I think is many of the priorities which Ofwat has been pushing have led to these kind of problems. Keeping prices down, for example, which has been the main drive of Ofwat for a very long time, has the effect of encouraging borrowing, which, as you've pointed out, borrowing has overstretched. 14 billion borrowing by Thames Water on an income revenue of about 2.2 billion is a bit bonkers. So there's a lot wrong with this. On the other hand, nationalisation, for a start, as Stephen suggested, it would take a while and it would be expensive. It's not all that, if you look at Scotland and Northern Ireland, which are, of course, still run by the state, we find that they're doing worse on leakages and they're doing worse on sewage spills. And we're actually, the record of England and Wales water over the last 20 years has been one of more or less continual improvement, not as fast as we want to see it. And I think this is down to the regulator. I don't think we should go down the direction of trying to nationalise it again.
So what about all the money that the shareholders have been taking out of it? And they promised a certain level of investment over a period of time, but then they took all the money out at the beginning. What about that, though?
Well, I don't think that's actually
that wouldn't
true.
happen in a private company.
There was a considerable injection of investment in the early stages of privatisation, and there is much more planned. There are things going ahead at the moment. I mean, nobody has talked, for example, while talking around Thames Water, they haven't really been talking about the Thames Tideway Tunnel, which is going to make a major difference to the Thames estuary. This is 20-kilometre long tunnel from Acton down to Stratford and Beckton, which it's a 24-foot diameter tunnel here, which is going to get rid of a lot of these problems of sewage overspill into the River Thames. So that is going ahead. That's cost £4 or £5 billion.
That may be one thing, but
we shouldn't downplay this.
Well, true, but they shouldn't be dumping the water in the first place. But I hear you. Thank you so much for all
this is
your...
very difficult not to do, Nana, because if you
it is. They just need to not do it.
It comes back into the house. If that's what you want, welcome to
but they shouldn't be dumping the sewage, though. I mean, there are rules to that. They should be treating it before it goes out in that way. And they need to fix all their old pipes as well, all the leaking water. They lose billions and billions of litres of water every day.
Yeah,
so...
I'll reckon on leaking water is a lot better than you think. It's a lot better than
well,
most
how do you know what I think?
Countries. If you look at
how do you know what I think? You don't know what I think, but yeah, I hear you. All right, thank you so much to William Clouston, Social Democratic Party, Benedict Spence, political commentator, Stephen Pound, former Labour MP, and also Len Shackleton. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Right, this is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. On the way, we'll continue with that great British debate this hour. I'm asking, should we renationalise the water industry? You will hear the thoughts of my panel, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, also senior GB News commentator Nigel Nelson. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 5:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The French government will hold emergency talks this evening to address the civil unrest after a fifth night of riots. More than 700 people were arrested across the country overnight, with tear gas used to disperse crowds in Marseille. In Paris, an attempted murder investigation has been opened after a mayor's home was ram-raided and set alight. His wife and one of his children were hurt. 2 people have been killed and 3 are in a critical condition after a mass shooting in the US state of Maryland. Police say up to 30 people were injured in the city of Baltimore, where people had gathered for an event called Brooklyn Day. The suspect or suspects are reportedly still at large. The US president will meet King Charles and the Prime Minister when he visits the UK next week. Buckingham Palace has confirmed Joe Biden will visit Windsor Castle on the 10th of July. The White House says he's travelling to London to strengthen the close relationship between the nations. He'll then head to Lithuania for the NATO summit before going on to Finland. 5 Just Stop Oil activists have been charged with behaviour likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress after being arrested for disrupting London's Pride March yesterday. Police say 2 other men have been released on bail pending further inquiries. And the NHS has seen a steep rise in its demand for gambling addiction services. Health officials are particularly concerned about a touch of a button bets, saying children and adults are being bombarded with gambling ads. New specialist clinics are being opened across the country after nearly 1,400 patients were referred last year. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, it's back to Nana.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Still to come here on GB News, Prince William and Prince Harry will both attend the annual Diana Awards, but separately. They did this by sending in 2 pre-recorded videos, and does that suggest the brothers are even more divided than first thought? But before that, on the way next, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, should we renationalise the water industry? Don't go anywhere.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome. If you've just joined me, it's coming up to 41 minutes after 5 o'clock. Now, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should we renationalise the water industry? Now, ministers are drawing up contingency plans for Britain's biggest water suppliers as Thames Water finds itself swimming in £14 billion worth of debt, with sewage spills and Thames Water leaking a shocking 630 million litres of water every day from its ageing pipework. Many campaigners have argued that the water companies have mismanaged and abused the natural resource for vast profit. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should we renationalise the water industry? Well, joining me to discuss, my panel, Danny Kelly and also Nigel Nelson. You didn't get the big title. I know you were expecting it, but you didn't get it. You were a bit shocked by that, weren't you? You wanted broadcaster and journalist.
I wanted my full accreditation, yeah.
Right, go on then, Danny, as soon as you're...
Do you know, I've driven down from the Midlands. I live 94 miles away. And this morning I had a cup of coffee made with Severn Trent water, and I've just had a glass of water from Thames Water. The Severn Trent boss is on £3.2 million a year.
Ridiculous.
The Thames Water boss is on 2-point-something million a year. Now, is it their fault that they've got so many leaking pipes? Well, I don't think it is their fault that they've got so many.
What do you mean it's not their fault?
It's an antiquated system, isn't it?
Well, they should have been repairing the pipes. Listen, if you're in charge of something and your pipes are leaking, you fix it.
Is it going to be improved if we nationalise it? So automatically you're going to save all of these, I think, absurdly inappropriate salaries.
You know, that's a starter.
Yeah, of course, £3 million for managing a failing water
a lot
company.
Of them have
but is it going to be improved, though? Is it going to be improved?
But a lot of them come from the water regulator as well, so they worked at the regulator.
So it's all in-house. Yeah, it's all a bit incestuous. But is it going to be improved? I don't know. Is the price of water going to come down? Then one would expect it would. Because if it's going to fail under a nationalised programme, it's going to be cheaper. If it's going to fail under a privatised programme, it's going to be more expensive.
Well, no, on the contrary, it should actually come down.
Under a national or a privatised?
Under a nationalised system, it should come down. I mean, if you just take energy, that our energy bills have gone up something like over 50% in this country France, which has a publicly owned energy company, 4%. First of all, you take out the dividends and all the profits that people make. As far as I'm concerned, I'd like to see all public services and all public utilities in public control. I think the public should own the things that are absolutely essential. And if you look around the place, it just seems to be the whole privatisation process has failed. I mean, you mentioned Thames Water, £14 billion in debt. It started out in '89 when Margaret Thatcher privatised it. No debt. You look at the railway companies, that the kind of debts that they've run up over the last 5 years, 53 billion, that's the taxpayer paying it. I mean, it doesn't seem to me that the privatised industries actually work. So on the basis of that, let's have it in public control. And yeah, you'd have to hope then that they would actually be able to make it work properly. But I don't see any reason why they shouldn't.
Well, one of the benefits of privatisation is, of course, the government benefits with a big load of dough.
Where?
In 1989, it was sold off for £6.5 billion. So that would be going into the coffers.
Since then, they've been subsidising an awful lot of it. Subsidising these industries that have cost us extra money, so they haven't been run efficiently. I mean, the argument was that it was competition that was going to make it work. Well, look what happened to the energy companies. Big 6 energy companies. It was a cartel.
Yeah, the point of privatisation is that it's run by experts, by businessmen and businesswomen, not mandarins, not government mandarins, and that's supposed to be the benefit. So yes, you may benefit from it financially. You get a massive lump sum from in my case up there, from Severn Trent, for example. But also the benefit is that it's more streamlined. It should be run better, and so it's a win-win. It should theoretically be a win-win.
But you say instead of mandarins, you get business experts. But what you're getting is like a shifting of the chairs of the Titanic. And you've got people who have come from Ofwat, the water regulator, heading up the water companies, and then people going from they're going from Ofwat. So it's all in hand. That's why they know everything about how to get out of the loopholes, because they're the ones who know the regulation about the water, which is great, but it's not great for us because they know that they can give out a load of sewage when there's a flood, and they've got a certain number that they can do, and which is what's happening. They're all releasing raw sewage into the rivers, which is making it, which is disgusting. Why should we be putting up with that?
Yeah, and which is why I think that it should be a government responsibility. I mean, there's no way we can know it would actually be better, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be. You have the same people running it. Yep. What you don't have is your shareholders getting a dividend out of it.
Yeah, because it's not in. I mean, and also there is no competition in water, right? There isn't a competition. I can't say, do you know what? I don't fancy Thames Water. I'm not going to use you. I'm going to use Severn Trent or whoever they are. You can't. That's what comes to your pipe is what comes to your pipe.
Not without being Danny's neighbour.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to drive up and see me for a cup of tea.
No, I don't think I'm going to be doing that, Danny.
You're not invited.
No, you just said I need to.
No, it was a theory if you wanted to experience
So I'm not
Trent.
invited now.
No, you are invited.
This is just as well, Danny.
I'm uninvited.
Right, this show is nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome some of our great British voices. Their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they think about the topics we're discussing. I've got 4 of them. Let's bring them on. I've got Dr. Seshni in Milton Keynes. Seshni, what do you think about this? Should we renationalise water?
Yes, good afternoon, Nana. Yes, I agree with you and Nigel. I think it makes sense to renationalise the water industry, and I think it's to do with the costs currently, the concerns with the leaking pipes, also the concerns in terms of the loss of water through the leaking pipes, and also we know that there could be adverse weather conditions. So I think giving us more control by renationalising the water industry seems like the best way forward.
It would be, wouldn't it? OK, let's go to Brian Dugan. Brian Dukes, where is he? He's there in Solihull. Brian, you are in Solihull, aren't you, or somewhere else now?
I am indeed, Nana. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Yes. Well, look, the industry, Nana, clearly is not acting in the public interest, and that's the overriding concern. And why would it, in a way? We have 70% of the privatised water industry owned by foreign investment firms, by private equity, pension funds, businesses based in tax havens. And of course, their overriding concern is dividends and actually gaining a return for the shareholder, rather than investment in the infrastructure, which is much needed. Fergal Sharkey, who's kind of made this a bit of a life mission, he's talked about 3 decades of underinvestment, 3 decades of regulatory failure, 3 decades of mismanagement. and all topped off with 3 decades of a political vacuum, where it's almost been devoid of oversight and scrutiny. And I think the regulatory part of this is the overriding problem. It hasn't been properly regulated, and that's where we have to make a decision between whether putting billions of pounds into actually renationalising this is actually better than a different solution. But we need a solution.
We need a solution. Let's go to David Baum. David.
Good afternoon. I actually remember the time before it was denationalised, before it went private, it was nationalised. The infrastructure was just as bad then, if not worse. And one of the things that came out, especially from privatisation, was the companies promised to spend money on the infrastructure. But I think we're looking at this wrongly. If the companies are failing and they're paying their directors, etc., millions of pounds, they should be fined commensurate to putting the damage right. And can you imagine if a director was suddenly fined £1 million for failure? They may actually get their fingers out and do something about it, because then they could be rewarded for improvement.
David, they should be fired. They're not doing a very good job at all. They should go.
Yeah.
They've failed.
Fired or fined, whatever. Yeah. Get rid, bring in.
Get rid of them. Lee Webb. Lee.
Water is a critical resource, so it should never have been privatised in the first place. So what I understand, we haven't had a new reservoir built in well over a decade, and this is the responsibility of the water companies that are privatised. The CEO of any water company is there to maximise shareholder profits, and that's simply what they're existing for. So profits they're currently earning at the moment should be put back right into infrastructure and building reservoirs, because just in case you forgot, we've got a few million extra people now from when we last built the last one. So, yeah, they should be back under nationalisation, and the government should take charge in the future of what we need to be doing to actually improve the service of our water.
Yeah, thank you. Good thoughts. Thank you very much, Dr. Seshni Muglia, Brian Dugan and David Baum and Lee Webb. Thank you so much. Right, so today I've been asking, should we renationalise the water industry? Loads of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on this. Irene says it is a criminal. It is criminal. These people get away with getting paid so much money for ignoring leaking pipes, and now the public are being asked to pay more bills. So should we... What do you think then, Irene? Does that mean that it should be nationalised? Barbara says the water scandal is outrageous. Someone should be in jail. It should be brought back to public ownership. Paul says the money that we pay for water has been given to fat cat directors and shareholders. The water industry should be renationalised and no compensation should be paid to the greedy shareholders. Yeah, there's a theme here. I'm with you. I don't even know why. It's not a competitive environment, so how it should be a private business makes no sense to me at all either. Thank you for all of that. But moving on to another story. Now, this caught my eye today. Prince William and Harry have separately and virtually attended an event which supports young people in the name of their mother, the late Princess Diana. They've recorded separate videos congratulating the winners of the ceremony. Now, the brothers together are apart, a stark reminder of the chasm that remains between them. So what does it mean? What does it mean, these brothers doing that? George, Nigel Nelson and also Danny Kelly. Nigel, what do you think? I mean, their mother would be furious. She'd be turning in her grave if she could see the way they're behaving.
Yes, I think she would. And what is sad is, for an event like this, they can't come together. And to do it virtually just is sending the signal that they really can't stand to be in the same room as each other. For the sake of their mother, an award ceremony like this, it's to do with young people. It's the one time I'd like to see Harry back in this country.
Don't know about that. Danny?
But the only thing that is keeping those two talking, whether it's physically or virtually, is the mother. William understandably loathes his brother. After all he's done. And with hindsight, he was right to smack him in the kitchen at Frogmore House. And Harry should have defended himself and smacked him back, but he didn't. So William loathes him, and I understand why. If it wasn't for Princess Diana, that would be the end of their relationship.
Do you think? Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts on that one? Do we want Harry back? Nah, it's all right. But it's time now for Supplement Sunday. This is the part of the show where my panellists pick stories that have tickled their fancy. Let's start with Nigel's story. Nigel, yours is about what Rolling Stones and Mick Jagger.
Yeah, well, I think we ought to congratulate Mick Jagger, 79 years old. He's engaged to be married to his girlfriend, Mel Hamrick, who's half his age. And after so many girlfriends, he should hope that this will be the last time.
Well, how old is he?
Oh.
How old is he? Oh, very good. Very good.
Nice
How old
one. Sorry, I didn't know quite caught that.
Nice one.
But how old is he? 79, right?
Yeah, he's 79, yeah.
Last time, yeah. Danny?
This is a great story about members of the royal family deciding not to take part in diversity and inclusivity training, despite the Lady Hussey scandal. So a lot of people are saying, members of the royal family, you need to be more inclusive. You need to go on a course, OK, about unconscious bias. And I don't know who, but they've just said no, which is great. You know, if you want to go on an unconscious bias course, you do it, but I'm not going on one. And nor would I.
Well, I think it's ridiculous. Unconscious bias is one of those things where they say, you don't know you're being racist, but you're being unconscious about it. Yeah. So I'm going to constantly tell you that that's what you're thinking. Yeah. Even though you weren't thinking that, it then becomes a bias that you're aware of, and it now becomes your bias that maybe didn't exist in the first place.
I hate this culture at the moment.
I'd just like to know when I'm being unconsciously biased.
Well, they'll tell you what it is, and then you put it in your consciousness, and it makes you biased even though you hadn't even thought about it.
You reckon?
Yeah, that's what they do. It's called unconscious bias because you never thought about it. They thought about it, and they're inserting the suggestion into your brain.
I'll think about that.
Yeah. Right, well, let's take a look at my story then. Now, this is my supplement. Police officers have been stopped from wearing a badge which commemorates colleagues that have been killed while serving in their force, sparking anger from the families of the fallen officers. Now, the badge shows the thin blue line emblem, but a similar symbol is displayed in the branding of the transphobic far-right group in the US. So officers were banned from wearing the badge at Pride events in case it offended members of the LGBT+ community. Let's see what my panel think of that. Danny?
Why are we pandering to such a tiny minority? Less than 1%. Why are we doing it? Why can't the old Bill wear that badge with pride to remember the heroes that have lost their lives trying to save our lives?
Because it looks a bit like a far-right flag, apparently.
That doesn't matter. So if it does, well, that's unfortunate. It's the thin blue line. If you don't like it, that's it. Don't even look at the copper.
I think that the police officers individually should make their own decision about whether to wear it. They may decide, because of its connotations with the right wing, that it would be better not to. It should be down to them.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, they should wear it with pride.
Yeah, but
it's up to them, isn't it?
Nana's just crowbarred in a guy. Went over your head too.
You weren't listening now. You were caught up not listening there, innit?
Yeah. Yes. Pay attention now.
Yeah, OK.
Yeah, stay focused. Well, listen, it's been fun. On today's show, I've been asking, would you be happy with a pylon in your backyard? And according to our Twitter poll, 6.7% of you said yes, and 93.3% of you say no. I have no idea why the government think it's a good idea. If you're watching and listening in governmental circles, it's madness. Nobody wants it. We don't want it. And I don't fancy a pylon in my backyard. I just simply wouldn't have it. Wouldn't have it. Do you imagine me bumping into a pylon blindfold? I'd sue them. I'd say, I'm sorry, it shouldn't have been there. But still, I've got to say a huge thank you to my fabulous panel. Danny Kelly.
Thank you very much.
And also Nigel Nelson, good to see you again. You're back again, aren't you? You never leave here.
Yes, that's right. I'm back again. I'm with you next Sunday.
Next Sunday.
And on Tuesday morning.
Wonderful. Well, listen, I've got to say a huge thank you to you at home for your company as well. It's been a pleasure as ever. Don't forget, you can check out the GB News app and check out the show if you missed it live, or stream all of the shows here on YouTube. I'll be back on Saturday. Next up, though, it's Gloria Meets. And I wonder who she's meeting. Wait and see.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households.